Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 61. While they waited for Shepard to finish retrieving the missing Krogan females, Rex and Revan had very little to do besides finding ways to keep themselves occupied. Revan was busy fielding the dozens of questions a Salarian technician was assaulting her with about the shield system being delivered elsewhere, and mostly just deflecting them by pointing out relevant sections of the installation and maintenance manual some of her Quarian engineers had insisted on. Rex, on the other hand, was taking the time they spent waiting as an opportunity to terrorize the guards surrounding them. While she was glad Rex was finding something to keep himself occupied, she really did wish he chose something other than listing off the different parts of a Salarian he was planning on eating if they tried to pull something. It had been amusing seeing the agents around them twitch and shuffle uncomfortably at first, but now it was just starting to get distracting, especially when she was starting to feel uneasy and noticed several whispered conversations happening around them. Listening in was somewhat of a challenge, though. Directional microphones only did so much around loud Krogan. A worried-looking technician power-walking towards one of the officers drew the Sith's attention, and she did her best to listen in. Another incursion. Air defenses report unidentified craft skirting our inbound approach vectors. It's like someone's testing our defenses. Seems that way, sir. I don't like it, not with... The rest of the conversation was lost under Rex's booming laugh as he finally got one of the STG agents to react, and unfortunately the two she was listening in on had moved before he was done. It was confirmation that something was going on, though. An attack! The Reapers hadn't been sighted in this system yet, but there was nothing stopping them from having indoctrinated agents infiltrate ahead of their main forces and destabilize important locations. An important STG base would certainly be a valuable target. It could also be the Asari Jedi. If a few of them happened to be on Surkesh or nearby enough to get there before the Normandy did, Revan could see them risking an attack to try and assassinate her now that she was away from her flagship. Or perhaps a betrayal. The Dalatras certainly wasn't pleased about getting pressured into releasing the Krogan females. If she decided destroying any chance of a genophage cure was important enough, Revan could easily see the Salarian ordering an attack on her own planet. It was unlikely, though, since the only way the Dalatras wouldn't be immediately implicated was if the attack was done by a different species and capable of overcoming an STG base. Not something easy to arrange in the short time between the agreement and their arrival. There was also the possibility that it was simply coincidence and nothing would come from the disturbance. Revan huffed a laugh and stood. She wasn't that lucky. Ignoring her STG minder, the Sith moved to the edge of the balcony overlooking the valley the base was settled in and focused on another conversation happening nearby. Outbound comm traffic 20 minutes ago from inside the base, one Salarian was saying. A burst transmission, fully encoded, with no identity signature. No signature? That's against protocol. I know. Someone's passing a message, the soldier said gravely. I've got a bad feeling about this. Inside the base, was it? Suddenly the betrayal option was looking a lot more plausible than Revan would have expected. Shepard was already heading down into the lower levels, so there was no point contacting her. At this point, the best thing would be to collect the females and evacuate the base as quickly as possible. After that, Revan's train of thought was derailed as a klaxon started blaring throughout the base. Alert! Threat Condition 2 has been declared. Scramble readiness teams. Suddenly there were soldiers running all over, and even a few VTOL aircraft taking off from the base. It was an impressive response time, even if the STG agents had already been suspicious from earlier activity. The Sith felt Rex step up behind her. What's going on? Someone's been probing the base's defenses, she replied. I overheard it from some of the soldiers, and I think we are going to find out who in just a moment. She pointed at several dots that had appeared on the skyline. Enemy aircraft, and a lot of them. Rex snarled angrily as several ships simply blew by the STG fighters, using their numbers to slip through easily while a few lagged behind to engage the defenders. Soon enough, the entire base was being swarmed by shuttles dropping off squads of soldiers. Human soldiers, in fairly recognizable armor. "Rex, call Shepard and let her know our timetable just got accelerated," Revan ordered, focusing all her attention on one of the incoming shuttle pilots. There was a sort of haze around his mind, similar to the Asari she had met when Shepard had gone to recruit Okir, yet different, less subtle, but more than enough to prevent the Sith from influencing his mind without more effort and focus than she could afford at the moment. She didn't need to, though. A sharp tug using the Force and the pilot's neck suddenly snapped, allowing the dropship to nosedive into the valley below. One group down, dozens to go. And, unfortunately, it looked like she wasn't going to have time to focus on repeating her last trick. Too many Cerberus soldiers had landed at the base, and Revan couldn't afford to stand still, focusing on the pilots without risking one of them hitting her with a high explosive. "We have a problem," Rex growled as he stalked back over to the Sith. "Only one of the females survived. We need to get her out of here before Cerberus or one of the Solarian bastards manages to kill her. And if she died, so did the hopes of a genophage cure." "Then we need to leave," Revan decided. "How long until Shepard is done in the lower levels?" "They already have the female moving through the quarantine procedure," Rex said. "But the elevator was trapped. A bomb. They're leaving through an emergency exit and won't be able to meet up with us." A bomb in a secure base. Either Cerberus had some of the best infiltrators around to sneak that in before their attack, or it was another sign they had been betrayed. Though the question by who remained. A deniable attack by the Daltras, or an indoctrinated agent of the Reapers. The quarantine cells open at the landing pad. Revan remembered from a conversation with one of their minders about the Yarg being moved down into the base. "We'll meet them there. I'll get the shuttle, and do my best to make life miserable for Cerberus." Revan nodded and ignited one of her sabers. "I'll help clear the base then. Draw as many of their soldiers away as possible. Dash, oh dash." "Contact! More Cerberus just up ahead," Garrus barked before opening up with his blaster rifle. 2 Cerberus troops fell over with smoking holes in their armor before the others made it behind cover and returned fire. Shepard dove behind a metal support beam. "Liara, singularity!" "On it!" The sphere of biotic power dragged the remaining soldiers from behind their own cover before Shepard detonated the whole thing with a shockwave. One explosion later, and the squad was wiped out, and her own team was moving on. This was the 3rd squad they had run into, and honestly the only reason Shepard and her team were able to cut through them so quickly is that the base's layout and defenses basically forced Cerberus's dropships to drop off one squad at a time, in areas with almost no cover too. The resulting shooting gallery was a godsend for now, but eventually enough squads would establish themselves that they would begin to converge and overrun the defenders. Shepard needed to get the Krogan female to safety before that happened, hopefully without getting the rest of them killed in the process, since it seemed Cerberus somehow managed to sneak in a goddamned army. Thankfully, she didn't need to worry about all that entirely by herself. Rex was going to meet them at the landing bay, and Revan was apparently going to distract Cerberus. All Shepard and her team needed to focus on was getting the female there. She made a promise the Krogan would make it back to Tuchanka. She intended to see it through. "Everyone good?" she called out, getting 2 positive responses. "Then let's keep moving." Liara consulted a map on her Omni-tool. "There's a route to the next level through the labs. You should have access to enter those too. It will definitely save us time getting back to the containment unit." "We better hurry too," Garrus added. "The female isn't going to last long against this much firepower." "Morden will let us know if there's any trouble," Shepard said confidently. And wasn't that a surprise? A nice one to be sure, but it had been a bit of a shock to realize the insider agent that had leaked the existence of the females in the first place was an old crew member and the one scientist with the best chance of creating a cure. Shepard would love to hear the story of how he managed to pull that one off when they weren't in the middle of a massive terrorist attack. The Spectre quickly found the entrance to the labs, and after a quick check, confirmed she actually did have clearance to enter. Let her team through the connecting rooms. Most were empty save for some discarded equipment, but 2 had contained some living creatures in them. The first was several Varren that the Solarians had been trying to experiment on, something about chemical markers to make them easily controllable. They were also considered a failure and marked to be terminated since the treatment was going to kill them in a few days, so Shepard had no qualms about releasing them just as a Cerberus squad passed by the cages. It was the other cages she had no intention of going near. Not 1 but 2 Yarg specimens were staring hatefully at the 3 of them from behind the force field. And considering the one she saw earlier and the empty active cage next to them meant there was a potential 3rd somewhere on the base, a 3rd that was potentially loose and wreaking havoc on both the Solarians and Cerberus. Species 732 authorized for covert uplift, Garrus read from the nearby terminal. Apparently they are ideal candidates to expand Solarian influence with full deniability. They called it a minimal risk. Obviously, they never had to fight a Yarg face to face, Liara grumbled. It looks like a 3rd one might be missing. A few STG might be learning what that's like right now, Shepard pointed out. As long as we don't run into it, that's fine by me. And if they decide to push forward with that project, I know a few contacts that would be plenty happy to receive a tip from a concerned source about the Solarians breaking Citadel law. Shepard hid a smile at that. It was still a bit weird to see the sheltered archaeologist turned shadow broker casually threaten things like that, but at the same time Liara had really grown into the role. That smile died a swift death when the team opened the door out of the labs and found a Cerberus squad waiting for them. That wasn't the concerning part, though. No, that was because the previously missing Yarg made its appearance by tearing around a corner and ripping a soldier in half before grabbing a second and shoving him halfway through the wall and roaring out a challenge. The remaining 2 reflexively opened fire, but the soldier getting shoved through the wall must have ruptured some sort of gas pipe because a jet of fire suddenly filled the hallway, incinerating the remaining soldiers and blocking the Yarg from continuing forward. Whatever that gas was burned hot enough that the massive alien decided to run back the way it came, gone just as quickly as it arrived. Well, that happened, Shepard muttered, trying to process the explosion of violence before attempting to inject a little levity into their situation. Careful. There goes the next shadow broker. Yeah, could have sworn he was muttering Tassoni the whole time, Garrus added in, getting a full body shiver from their 3rd. Not funny. It's a little funny. The Turian disagreed. Liara narrowed her eyes at him. I'll send Tali your extranet search history. Huh? What? Why? Garrus stuttered, and as much as Shepard wanted to burst out laughing at the poor guy's dumbstruck face, they were on the clock right now. All right. As fun as this is, let's get moving. Morden is waiting on us. Don't think I don't have something on you, Shepard, Liara threatened as she followed after the commander. Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 62. Revan watched dispassionately as the headless body of the last Cerberus trooper she encountered slumped to the floor, the edges of his neck armor glowing a soft orange from where her lightsaber had cut through. That was the 7th squad she had cut her way through, and yet there had been no discernible attempts to either properly engage or avoid her. And in her experience, that meant there was either no plans to deal with any disruptions that didn't risk their main objective, or Revan was about to walk into a trap. She triggered her comms. Shepard, how long until you've secured the Krogan? We're moving as fast as we can, but Cerberus damaged the lift. We're dealing with 2 squads at least, and a heavy mech, Shepard yelled back over the sound of gunfire. If you're not busy, we could use a hand. Revan was about to reply when the sound of several lightsabers igniting at once cut her off. It appears something just came up. You will have to deal without me. The Sith lady ended the call and turned to look at her opponents. Well, isn't this an unpleasant surprise? Dash oh dash. Revan! Revan! Shepard bit back a curse and ducked as more gunfire whizzed over her head. It looked like they were on their own. If it had just been Cerberus soldiers, it would have been one thing, but they had managed to sneak in an Atlas mech somehow. The machine had her whole squad pinned, and if they didn't take it out soon, it was going to destroy the Krogan's pod and any chance they had at a genophage cure. She made a motion at Liara and waited a moment as her squadmate tossed a singularity at a few of the remaining troopers before collapsing back behind cover. Shepard distantly noted that Liara had been throwing around advanced biotics almost non-stop and was hitting her limit. More actively, she was barking orders at Garrus. They had a limited window of time to act before they were fully boxed in and picked off. "Burn its shields now!" she yelled, already firing at the Atlas as quickly as her M23 katana could cycle. "On it!" Garrus called back and opened fire with his blaster rifle. "How you plan on getting through the armor, though?" Shepard was still working on that part. They had been expecting a quick escort mission, not a heavy assault against heavy-class mechs. They didn't have anything meant to punch through that level of armor, damn it. Not yet. Just try aiming for the canopy. She didn't have high hopes of even Garrus's rifle melting through the heavily reinforced material, unless the Atlas decided to stand still for a while, but hopefully the flashes of red would disorient the pilot a bit. Now she needed to find a way to kill it. Her eyes scanned the battlefield. If Cerberus was serious about breaching the pod before it reached the landing bay, they would have needed heavy weapons. There, a dead trooper that had been carrying a rocket launcher. A quick biotic pull had the weapon in her grasp, but the bad news was there were only 2 shots. Enough to damage the outer armor, but extremely unlikely to completely shut down the mech unless she scored a direct hit twice in the same spot. Actually, that gave her an idea. "Liara, you doing okay?" Shepard asked as she planned her next move. "I'm fine, Shepard, but I don't think I have many more singularities in me." "That's fine. What about a precision warp?" "Easily, but that won't be enough to destroy such a heavily armored..." Liara trailed off when she saw what Shepard was doing with one of the remaining missiles. "Shepard, no, that's insane." "Only if it doesn't work," Shepard retorted. "Now get ready. We're probably only going to get one shot at this." Ignoring Liara's attempt at a protest, Shepard waited until the Atlas turned to aim where Garrus was still putting bolt after bolt into its canopy to shoulder the rocket launcher and fire a shot at the plating just under the mech's left arm where the armor was thinner. It hit, and to Shepard's relief, she could see the hole in the metal plating. "Great!" They still had a chance, pushing down the voice in her head that was screaming this was a terrible idea. With the ease of long practice, Shepard vaulted over the divider she had been using as cover and triggered a biotic charge straight towards the Atlas. The mech shifted to target her, forcing her to duck under a flailing limb as she jumped onto the chassis and held on tightly. She only had a few moments before the pilot realized what she was doing, so the second she was stable, she pulled out the second rocket she had covered in Omnigel and shoved it as deep into the hole in the plating as possible. A quick electric pulse from her Omnitool essentially welded the missile in place half a second before the Atlas pilot moved and knocked her off. "Now, Liara!" A heartbeat later, the missile was wrapped up by a bright blue corona of dark energy and exploded as the shifting biotic fields triggered the warhead just under the Atlas's protective plating and doing far more damage than a single missile should do to a heavy mech. It just wasn't enough. The Atlas was still moving. Shepard scrambled to move even as she stared down the barrel of the mech's mass accelerator cannon, knowing even a near miss would reduce her to a red smear on the floor. So thank God, Buddha, or even Revan's mysterious force, that before the pilot could pull the trigger, a red energy bolt streaked into the now much wider hole in the mech and hit something important. The mech locked up as systems overloaded, and Shepard briefly saw the pilot fighting with the controls before the Atlas detonated with the force of a small bomb. The Spectre was knocked head over heels into a wall from the blast wave, but she was still alive. "Shepard, you all right?" Liara was by her side in seconds, running a medical program on her Omnitool. Garrus wasn't far behind, though he was more focused on scanning their surroundings for any remaining Cerberus troops. "Yeah, a little tender, but I think I'm fine," she grunted out. "Besides, my plan worked great, right?" If you mean the string of lucky coincidences that you not only managed to secure an IED in a very small hole, that Liara was able to detonate it despite the safeties built into the missile to stop it from doing exactly that when hit by biotics, and that I happened to have a somewhat clear shot with a rifle that uses concentrated plasma instead of normal ammunition, then yes, it was foolproof, Garrus said dryly and looked at Liara. How did you manage to cause that explosion anyway? Shepard disabled the safeties beforehand. The Asari grumbled. She's lucky her charge didn't set anything off. Ah, more of her brand of insanity then. That makes sense. Shepard glared at the both of them. If you're done picking on me, we've got a Krogan to secure. Liara, call Rex and let him know we cleared the landing site. Garrus, keep an eye out for more Cerberus. I'm going to try and get a hold of Revan again. I don't like that we've heard nothing from her since we lost contact. You got it, Commander. Both her squad mates straightened up as they focused back on the mission. While they split off to do as she ordered, Shepard glanced out over the increasingly damaged-looking facility, wondering what exactly had managed to hold Revan up for so long. Dash, oh dash. Revan leaned back as a glowing blade narrowly missed her throat. Another stabbed towards her leg that she parried with a small twirl of one of her own lightsabers. A third assailant moved to try attacking the Sith lady from behind, but a burst of Force lightning forced them to back off. I was a bit worried when I saw that Cerberus managed to create a lightsaber design of its own. But if this is the extent of your knockoffs, then I must say I'm disappointed, Revan said coldly to her 7 remaining opponents. In fact, I might go as far to say it is more a mockery than an effective weapon design. She wasn't exaggerating that last part either. When she had turned to find 10 lightsaber-wielding opponents, she had initially been cautious. Even if the blades looked like ancient proto-saber designs that had fallen out of use millennia ago in her own galaxy, a lightsaber was a lightsaber. In the hands of a skilled enough warrior, it could cut down almost any opponent. There was a reason they remained the iconic weapons of Jedi and Sith after thousands of years. But the things Cerberus had deployed against her, they barely deserved the name. Not when out of the 3 dead assailants, Revan had only killed 2. The third had burned to death when the power pack connected to the blade overloaded and exploded from the operative blocking too much in quick succession. With that limitation in mind, it made sense why Cerberus deployed these saber-wielders in such a large group. It wasn't specifically because they thought Revan was a large enough threat 10 operatives were needed, but that they needed around that many to allow individuals to swap out and bleed off the heat building up in their power packs. Otherwise, Revan could simply overload the packs by attacking one person at a time until the packs overloaded. Something the Cerberus agents seemed well aware of because unlike the troopers' bulky armor, their suits were much lighter and more flexible, and they seemed to prefer assassination-style strikes rather than any actual saber fighting. I don't believe the elusive man is deluded enough to believe something like this would be enough to kill me, Revan said aloud, which means I was not your initial target. So I wonder, what were you all supposed to be here for? Revan wasn't expecting an answer. Even the most basic Cerberus troopers implanted with Reaper technology were poor conversationalists. This group had been modified much more extensively going by the amount of metal Revan had cut through when killing 2 of them. She would be very surprised if any of them were capable of more than doggedly carrying out their orders. Even extensive torture would likely be borderline useless at extracting information even if Revan had the time or inclination for it. No matter. Cerberus went through the effort to send those toys all the way out here, Revan said, raising her own sabers into a ready position. I may as well show you how far your scientists still have to go. A burst of speed put the Sith directly in front of one of the Cerberus cyborgs. It was telling how fragile their weapons really were that the agent tried to dodge instead of using his saber defensively. The protective barrier around him held for only a brief moment before Revan's red saber cut through his heart. The female agent that was the Sith's next target learned from that at least, and managed to parry 2 of Revan's attacks before 3 others rushed to intervene. Revan's blades whirled around her in intricate patterns of light to fend off the rush of attacks, mentally counting down how many strikes each blade had left before they risked exploding. It quickly became hard to keep track, though, because one agent would cycle out when Revan estimated they had half a dozen strikes left with one of the remaining observers. But if they planned on simply outlasting her, Revan had a nasty surprise for them. While she very rarely ever found herself facing numbers like this, she had dueled several Jedi Knights and even Masters at once on her own before, and they had been much more dangerous than these indoctrinated cyborgs could ever be. Revan sidestepped a lunge from behind and almost casually sliced upwards at her attacker's arm, severing it halfway below the elbow. Continuing her sideways motion, Revan pivoted, so her recently disarmed opponent was between her and another attacker. The attacker didn't seem to care they were about to slash through their fellow agent. At least they didn't, until Revan grabbed the still-ignited proto-saber in a telekinetic grip and guided it up into the attacker's chest while she stabbed the first agent through the back with her own saber. Reduced to less than half their original number, it became clear to the remaining Cerberus agents there was little hope they would be able to defeat Revan. Yet she couldn't sense even a hint of flicker of emotion from any of them as they threw themselves at the Sith in a fashion eerily similar to the collector drones. Revan sidestepped a stab, blocked a slash, parried another so it forced the fourth opponent to dodge or impale themselves on their ally's saber. A counter-slash was blocked, an incoming attack parried, a near miss on an agent that stumbled backwards, slash parry, stab, block, riposte. One of the remaining agents fell to the ground with a burning gouge across their chest. Slash, slash, stab, parry. A jump to the side followed by a force push as an agent attempted to use their power pack overloading as an improvised explosive. Slash, parry, slash. And then there was one, Revan said lightly as the Cerberus agent she just attacked split in two, bisected from shoulder to hip. But it seems you discovered the design flaw that made proto-sabers a relic of the past. She looked at the severed power cord dangling from the now useless saber hilt. Revan had deliberately not targeted the glaring weak point until now for one reason only. She needed information. Reaching out a hand towards the final agent, Revan focused on the force and used the most complete stasis she could. A shimmering energy field appeared over the agent that prevented them from moving at all. There would be no last stand, no attempt to escape, and no suicide attempt to deny Revan what she was after. After all, while Revan was disinclined to use torture to gain information. Now then, let's see what Cerberus was hoping to gain with this little attack, she muttered, placing a hand on the frozen agent's head. She had little need to rely on such crude methods, not with the power of the Force on her side. Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 63. And then Eve just rips the claymore out of Rex's hands and blows away the two troopers that showed up. You should have seen his face. Shepard finished narrating as the rest of the room broke out in good-humoured laughter. She was feeling pretty good despite what happened on Surkesh. Yes, the mission started off rocky and only got worse when Cerberus attacked. But everyone made it through with only a few cuts and bruises at worst, and they succeeded in retrieving the surviving female Krogan. Mordin had joined back up and was working on completing the genophage cure after taking over nearly a third of the medbay. And most importantly, the treaty between the Krogan and Turians looked like it was going to go through. They were finally making solid strides towards a coordinated effort against the Reapers. What about you, Revan? We never managed to link back up during the attack. Any stories you want to share? She asked their resident evil empress, who was actually not wearing her visor for once. Considering her team ended up facing an Atlas on foot, she was half expecting the elf to say she fought an armoured division by herself. I ended up running into almost a dozen Cerberus infiltrators with proto-sabers, Revan replied while typing furiously on a datapad, causing several heads to snap towards her. Wait, proto-sabers? Are those what I think they are? Garrus asked. Cerberus has versions of your lightsabers now. Revan shook her head. Nowhere near as refined, emitted blades connected to an external power pack with several flaws in their design, which Shepard felt was missing the point a bit. But they are still plasma blades that can cut through nearly anything with minimal effort. I suppose, but it would be like comparing a modern firearm to a black powder flintlock. Even a shoddily constructed lightsaber would have a chance of causing the power pack to overload with enough hits or crack the focusing crystal. Shepard rubbed her eyes in annoyance. Right, you mean the weapon only one person in the galaxy knows how to make? Not true. There is a Jedi sect in the Asari Republic capable of making them that I've crossed blades with twice now, and a possible Quarian offshoot I'm still investigating. What? Liara all but explodes. When was this? Why don't we know about it? The first time was after we split up after the Collector mission. If I remember correctly, you and Shepard had left the planet urgently for some reason. Shepard held back a groan. Revan was talking about when they had to rush to take down the previous Shadow Broker after he sent a hit squad after Liara. With everything going on afterwards, Liara probably missed it, or someone had misreported it. Now she was almost afraid to ask what the second encounter had been like. Wait, I remember that incident, Liara said. A Justicar was killed by an unconfirmed party. If that was you, are you saying this Jedi sect is impersonating Justicars? That or they genuinely belong to the Justicars and are just a specialized subgroup, Revan admitted. I haven't had the opportunity to find out much about them without them attempting to kill me. But you're saying there are other groups using lightsabers in the galaxy, James cut in. That mean there's a chance for a few to slip our way? I wouldn't say no to a few upgrades. Get in line, Vega, Shepard half-joked. I need to negotiate for everyone to get blaster rifles before you go asking for a fancy glow stick. She didn't tell him Revan had already shipped over enough to outfit everyone on the Normandy. If anyone was getting a lightsaber on her ship, she was going to be first. Bah, they aren't that great anyway. Rex grumped. No weight to them, no heft. If I'm getting close enough to hit something, I want to feel it. You're just mad Revan won't let you play with hers, Shepard teased as she felt a message buzz on her Omnitool. Hackett wanted a meeting, and it looked like he invited Revan too, unless she just happened to get a message at the same time. Or he's just sore from all the tests Morden needed, Garrus jabbed. I heard something about needles. Rex glared at him. Watch it, Vakarian. Play nice boys. Shepard shook her head. Anyways, I should go. I need to speak with the Admiral. Revan stood at the same time, which confirmed her guess about the message she got, and the two of them headed to the QEC room. A few minutes later, they were greeted by the blue holographic form of Admiral Hackett. Commander, good to see you. The increasingly haggard-looking Admiral greeted once the connection was complete. And Empress Revan, thank you for coming. I wish we were meeting under better conditions, but the Reapers are making things difficult. How's the fight going? Shepard asked, worried by his tone. Mostly the same. We're holding but bleeding a little more with every battle. Though news that the Reapers have actually been defeated a few times thanks to your friend has kept morale up quite a bit, Hackett replied. I also heard chatter you're attempting to broker a treaty between the Krogan and the Turians. If I get Krogan boots on Palaven, the Turians promise their support, Shepard confirmed before grimacing. It's a work in progress. Rex wasn't going to move until his people had a completed cure. The promise of one a few years down the line wasn't enough to satisfy him. And Primus Victus wasn't going to send aid until the Krogan were on the ground. To make things more complicated, both of them had mentioned additional issues that they refused to discuss with others present. Shepard had initially thought Rex was only holding back to needle the Turian leader, but he had refused to talk about it with the rest of her ground team earlier when they were all trying to unwind. Thankfully, Hackett just nodded at the report and moved on. And how did Cerberus get involved? I don't know. She spread her hands helplessly. I have a theory about that, actually. Revan spoke up unexpectedly, causing both of them to look at her. While Shepard was busy retrieving the female Krogan, I was listening to some of the conversations around the base. Unidentified aircraft in the area, encrypted messages being passed from inside the base. "You think there was an infiltrator?" Hackett asked. "I think there was an inside informant, one highly ranked enough to not only know about Shepard retrieving the female Krogan, but also one that could convince an STG agent to send a signal moments before she would be the most vulnerable," Revan corrected. The timing of the attack was already suspicious. The bomb planted in the elevator and Cerberus specifically targeting the female Krogan, despite the STG efforts to bury her status and location strain's credibility. That Cerberus was able to slip that large of a strike force onto the Solarian homeworld without notice is ridiculous. Shepard rocked back on her heels at the thought of what Revan was laying out, that a highly positioned Solarian had sold them out to Cerberus to stop the possibility of a genophage cure, and by extension any hope of a treaty. This wasn't just some middling bureaucrat. "You're saying the Dalatras betrayed us," she whispered. The Sith nodded. "Of course, I have no solid evidence I could present, and any ties to the event will have been thoroughly covered up by now." "That isn't good. If Cerberus and the Solarian government are working together," Hackett started before Revan interrupted again. "I don't believe it's an official alliance. In fact, I am inclined to believe this was a personal decision from the Dalatras out of convenience. Otherwise, I doubt Cerberus would have felt the need to raid an unrelated lab for archaeological data about a dig site on somewhere called Eden Prime." Shepard shared a look with the Admiral. "That's where we found the beacon," she said. "The one that warned us about the Reapers in the first place. And a good place for Cerberus to look if they think the Protheans left more behind like they did on Mars." Hackett nodded. "There was a small security flotilla stationed there, but they went dark recently." He trailed off before seemingly snapping to a decision. "Shepard, I know you have your hands full trying to broker the treaty, but the Normandy is the only ship we have that can get a closer look without drawing attention. Can you investigate?" "I'll find the time, sir." Shepard agreed. Besides, it wasn't like Rex or the Primarch were going to budge until they had the completed cure. "Good. And speaking of the Protheans, I have an update about the device you found, Commander," Hackett said. "Alliance R&D has officially started construction. They are calling it Project Crucible. We're throwing everyone who knows how to swing a hammer at it, but we could always use more hands." He looked at Revan. "The Quarians and Geth are among the most advanced engineers in the galaxy. Can we count on the Sith Empire's assistance in the construction?" "Unfortunately not," the Empress said bluntly. "Not at the moment, at least. My entire workforce is tied up in weapons and ship construction. I simply don't have anyone to send." Hackett frowned at the refusal and Shepard couldn't help but feel a bit hurt. Revan had been the first to declare her support, and now she was holding back. Something wasn't adding up. "You have the biggest fleet in the galaxy," Hackett pointed out a bit accusingly. "And the most outdated and disparate," Revan countered. "The Quarian fleet hasn't been properly maintained for decades at the least, and the Geth ships have no life support systems. Outside of direct combat, they are mostly useless. The only ships I can reliably call on for every scenario are my Star Destroyers, and like I said, I have every hand I have dedicated to making more." Her amethyst eyes turned to meet Shepard's green ones squarely. "And not just those. Blaster rifles, shields, vehicles, and more. Everything is being produced as quickly as we can make it in preparation to supply the Empire's allies. Focus on your device if you wish. I will focus on making sure you have enough time to build it." "We'll take everything we can get," he nodded. "Shepard, keep up the good work. Hack it out." -. "So, what's the real reason you don't want to send help for the Crucible?" Revan closed her eyes and silently cursed Shepard's habit of pulling information together. "I wasn't lying when I said I needed all the hands I have working on producing war material to fight the Reapers." "I believe that," the commander nodded. "But I know enough about engineering from talking with Tali that you are going to have idle teams at times. Not to mention the Geth can share skills across platforms. You don't need every single one of them working all the time. Actually, I don't think you could have them all working even if you wanted them to, so there's another reason. Spill." Revan was tempted to deflect further, but the flash of hurt she had picked up from Shepard made her pause. Revan wasn't particularly close with very many people in the galaxy, partly because joining Shepard on her mission to investigate and eventually defeat the Collectors had limited how many people she interacted with, but also because Bastilla's betrayal had made her hesitant to allow people to get that close again. Yet, Shepard was the person Revan was closest with. It was unavoidable after the Sith had helped her deal with the trauma of her scars, the meditation sessions they had together, the spars and planning sessions. Shepard was probably the closest thing Revan had to a peer and a friend, so the Sith felt she at least deserved a bit of the truth. "Do you remember what I told you about how I found myself in this galaxy?" she asked. Shepard nodded hesitantly. "Something about being ambushed and an experimental hyperdrive?" "Yes. What I didn't tell you was that it was a trick, a betrayal from my closest friend, someone I considered a sister in all but blood," Revan began. "She had a vision that an ancient device we were in control of would corrupt me and send me spiraling into becoming a threat to the galaxy we were trying to save." Shepard was quiet for a moment. "I'm guessing that was Bastila. You mentioned that name on the derelict Reaper, and I don't think I've ever seen you that pissed off at something before." The Sith nodded in confirmation. "What kind of device was it?" "That she thought the only way to stop you from using it was to run you off to another galaxy entirely." "It was an automated factory, a massive facility built by a fallen empire that could build entire fleets by harvesting material from a nearby star. The downside was, the Star Forge was steeped in the dark side of the Force. It would push anyone using it to be more aggressive, more warlike." "Okay, but you were preparing for a war you knew was coming. As long as you knew about the effects, shouldn't that be worth the risk?" Revan shook her head. "You are assuming that the users would remain united against the approaching threat. Remember, the dark side promotes individuality, chaos, and instinct. Nothing inherently unacceptable, but one of the many reasons the Infinite Empire no longer exists in my galaxy is that they became incapable of working together. It was one of the factors that pushed my apprentice to betray me as well. After I seized control of the Star Forge again, I made sure to restrict how many people interacted with it and made sure they were capable of resisting the influence. There were a few near incidents that were stopped, but Bastila supposedly decided that if I fell, I wouldn't be stopped. So I had to be removed before then." "Supposedly?" Revan shrugged slightly. "I did some reflection when I faced an illusion of her on the Reaper. It's possible she saw the Reaper threat here and manipulated things so I would arrive here while she continued to prepare for our own omnicidal invasion." Okay, going to ignore that for now. What does that have to do with the Crucible?" "The Star Forge was a weapon that allowed whoever controlled it to make an automated armada that could bring the entire galaxy to heel with enough time," Revan said. "I could have simply waited until I had a force so massive that no one could resist, but I never trusted it. From the beginning, my plan was to convince the Republic to fortify and rearm itself, to build up its own strength to repel the Vong. Relying on a device I did not fully understand with the fate of the galaxy was impossible. For all we knew, there was some kind of flaw or hidden threat that could cause us to lose control. The Crucible is like that. It's a device that we know nothing about. Know nothing about what it does or even where it comes from. For all we know, it is a trap set by the Reapers designed to waste our time and resources in a final bid for survival when it could be spent fighting the Reapers directly." "Not all of us have super ships capable of fighting the Reapers evenly," Shepard pointed out. "I know, which is why I don't blame your admirals for pushing the project. But I can't support it, not without knowing more about it." Shepard let out a long puff of air and looked at the ceiling. "Okay, can't blame you for that. Besides, it's not like you aren't helping. I just don't want to think about what happens if our best hope turns out to be a trap like you think." "It's entirely possible I'm wrong," Revan admitted. If that's the case, you'll have my full support. But until then, like I told your admiral, I'll focus on fighting the Reapers directly so you have the time you need to finish the Crucible. We have plenty of other problems too. Are you hanging around until we hit Eden Prime? The Sith shook her head. I need to return to the Terminus systems. There's a pirate fleet disrupting my supply lines that are remarkably adept at detecting when our patrol fleets are out of position. I suspect the Jedi have something to do with it. Revan felt a pang of disappointment from the commander before it was buried under a surge of determination. Sounds like we've both got our work cut out for us then. Just remember, our alliance goes both ways. If you ever need help, just ask. I'll be sure to. Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 64. Revan stared down at the planet from the bridge of her flagship. It was fairly unimpressive, all told. A mostly barren rock only just capable of supporting a breathable atmosphere. If it weren't for the valuable minerals found there, Revan was quite confident no one but the most desperate would consider living there. But since those minerals were there were several large mining communities scattered across the surface that were in constant communication with each other. So when one of those sites issued an invasion alert about pirates, every site capable of it went into lockdown and a call was almost instantly sent out to the wider galaxy asking for help lifting the siege. A call that was nearly prevented thanks to some concerningly broad and powerful signal jamming that was only foiled thanks to one of the new hyperwave communications terminals the Empire had started rolling out across the Terminus systems. In fact, if the jamming effect truly was planetary in scope, the pirates might have been expecting each mining community to be cut off from each other, allowing for a series of lightning raids at each one while the miners struggled to figure out what was going on. This was not something the average group of pirates was capable of. Another thing they shouldn't have been capable of was spotting Revan's battle group as it dropped out of hyperspace and relocating to the other side of the moon without an active scan or dedicated line of sight. If they had arrived by mass relay or more conventional FTL Revan, could have maybe chalked it up to some impressive sensors, but the enemy fleet had already been in the process of maneuvering before the fleet actually arrived, which meant a Force user. Admiral Zora, report. To her credit, the young Quarian didn't hesitate to step forward. Despite the largely political reasons for her promotion, Tali Zora was performing very well. According to the distress call that was sent out, the planet was being attacked by 14 destroyer-to-cruiser-class ships. She read off a datapad. We can update that to 18 based off our own scans, though 6 of those seem to be modified cargo haulers than actual warships. And what do you suspect their goal is? A slave raid? Tali Zora shook her head. Unlikely. If that was their goal, they would have chosen a more populated world or attacked several mining sites at once. If they can jam an entire world, they can definitely coordinate several simultaneous raids. But their ground forces are mostly camped out in just one so far. She thought about it for a moment before hesitantly offering an answer. They could be trying to steal the minerals stored there. With the Reapers around, raw materials are going to be more valuable than ever, and it would explain the cargo haulers. Lithium, cobalt, and platinum specifically are going to be worth a fortune even in a raw state. It was a decent guess considering the information available to her, and Revan was sure to tell her so, but that wasn't the reason for this attack. I'm sure that's what most people would assume after investigating the aftermath of the attack, especially since that has been their objective the last several times they have attacked our shipping lines. But no, they are likely after a prototype weapons system currently being built at the facility our pirates seem to coincidentally be attacking. A prototype weapon? But how would they even know about something like that? Tali Zora asked. The Geth manage most of our security, and with all due respect, these are pirates. There's no way an informant with high enough clearance to know about a secret project would be willing to work with them. That was very true. Thanks to most of the current empire consisting of what used to be the migrant fleet, or planets that had to deal with the occasional warlord, There were very few people that would even consider having a casual conversation with a known pirate, let alone passing along vital information about secrets. It was a distrust bred from decades of wondering if the next pirate raid would be the end of their homes or lives. But the answer was also very simple. "I leaked the location," Revan said simply. "What?" Tali Zora wasn't the only one shocked. Several bridge officers ceased pretending to not be listening in on their conversation to openly stare at the Sith Empress. To be more accurate, I suspected there was someone backing the pirate fleet we've been dealing with and set a trap for them. There is a reason a backwater like this has a hyperwave transmitter after all, Revan said as she brought up the image she had seeded to several information brokers. I simply set out the right kind of bait. "I recognize that device," Tali Zora murmured. "It's the thing you took from Haestrom, right? I think you called it a holocron. How could something like that be a weapon?" "It can't, or at least not in the way most people consider things to be a weapon," Revan replied. "A holocron is a tool to preserve the totality of a Sith or Jedi's knowledge and pass that down to those that pass certain requirements." "How does it do that?" "The Creator makes an imprint on the holocron through the Force. If you were capable of using one and had one made by me, it would be no different than if we were discussing something over a holocall." "So it's like an AI?" Revan paused to consider her answer. This wasn't exactly a conversation she had been expecting to have, but it could be beneficial to have others capable of recognizing a holocron and what they could do. "Not in the sense that you mean," she said eventually. "The imprint is intelligent to a degree, but it is static is probably the best word for it. To use my earlier example, if you had a full holocron made by me and asked about a topic I am well versed in, it could explain as well as I could with little to no distinction. But if you asked it something I have no knowledge of, say the biology of a newly discovered species, it could make assumptions and inferences based on what was available to it, but it would not be able to truly learn anything new." "Ah, more like a traditional Vi, then. It can assist with a task, but it is not sentient." Tali Zora made a noise of understanding, only for Revan to shake her head. "That is actually a topic of much debate among Jedi and Sith. It's true that a holocron cannot generally learn past its creation, but there are several examples of holocrons, usually Sith-created ones, influencing their users in complex ways that should be beyond an imprint, convincing them to follow certain rules of thought that go against their default personalities, guiding them to locations even when the Creator had never been there, and at least one attempt that I know of at overwriting whoever accessed the holocron with the Creator's personality." Tali Zora gave the image a concerned look. "And that was just laying around for nearly 300 years. I'm almost afraid to think of what our ancestors were attempting to use it for." "They were actually using it as the processor for Star Map," Revan said, a hint of a smile in her voice. "I should probably mention what I described is not the only use for a holocron. Some are also capable of storing and processing vast amounts of raw data. Comparatively few are created with a full imprint. Most are simply restricted to a singular topic." "I get it. So most would only create a holocron for something like mechanical skills." The young admiral nodded. "Then why were you so sure the pirate's backer would try to take it?" "Because creating even a simple holocron is the work of a master. And initially skilled one at that," Revan explained. "The one I have seems to have actually originated from my home galaxy as well, so it would not surprise me if the Jedi I've run into are unaware of its true origin and think there are a limited amount throughout this galaxy. The Jedi using these pirates as a screen simply cannot leave one in my possession and will obviously do their best to reclaim it as soon as possible." It was one of her favourite strategies for dealing with other Force users, especially ones that relied on Force visions of the future. Even though Revan was notoriously unskilled at divining the future herself, all she had to do was set things up so that her opponent would be forced to come to her. Most of the time, they would be blinded by their own visions and taken by surprise when Revan's trap was sprung, or they would convince themselves that they could beat her regardless and face her directly. Not that that usually worked out in their favor. Much like what had happened here, this Jedi had either missed that this world was a trap or had blindly trusted their divinations to see them through whatever Revan had planned, only to be caught with their pants down as Revan's battle group jumped into the system. The Jedi was powerful enough to see the pirate fleet needed to retreat to a more defensible location, but not without stranding their ground forces in the process, right where she wanted them. Prepare the assault teams for landing and transfer control of the fleet to Captain Newlan. -O- Nulia Dizero. P.O.V. She should have known that working with a Justicar would come back to bite her in the arse at some point. Sure, raiding some backwater empire set up by the newest Terminus warlord was fun and set to make her crew richer than the last decade of raiding had, and Justicar Limerays had somehow been able to predict whenever the defense patrols were coming so they could slip away without much effort. But now the game had ended and she and her crew were stuck on an almost literal dirtball while their rides had to run away from Dreadnought-class ships, leaving them on their own while over a dozen shuttles were headed right towards the mining facility they had only mostly taken over. In short, they were fucked. And Nulia was fully aware what happened to pirates and raiders in this section of the galaxy. Limerays had fucked off at some point too, which wasn't surprising but wasn't helpful either. Captain, what do we do? Surrender and hope the Imperials had a thing for pleasure slaves? It wouldn't be the first time Nulia spent a few decades dancing on a pole. But no, that would only work if they had been minor annoyances instead of a large pirate fleet. Surrendering without assurances was a good way to get a bullet in the head, which meant they needed to put up enough of a fight that the Imperials would cut a deal instead of flushing them out of their hole, or Limerays found an escape route. Instead of answering her subordinate directly, Nulia pulled up her Omni-tool. All right, everyone, the free ride is over, and we've got incoming. Bunker down and get ready for a fight. She closed the device and looked at her panicked squad. Grab what you can and get everyone ready to sprint right for the closest shuttle to land. We running, Captain? We're securing away off this rock. Anything we get our hands on is probably newer than the pieces of shit we came here on. We can meet up with the fleet in orbit once they swing around again, Nulia countered. Never let the underlings know how bad things were until they couldn't do anything but follow or you had a solution. Rule number 1 for managing a pirate crew. Running implied they were completely fucked, and it was everyone for themselves. Stealing a shiny new shuttle? That was just business as usual. At least that's what everyone would pretend. Nuila didn't care as long as that meant she escaped with her life. She could always try building another pirate fleet later if she wanted, or finally take her mother's offer about joining the family business. Her musing about the future was interrupted by the sounds of rockets exploding overhead. All of them looked towards the sky to see a boxy shuttle with angular sides shake off the explosions and land on the other side of a cluster of buildings. Durable fucking things, someone commented, and Nulia agreed. 3 rockets to the hull and the shuttle barely looked scuffed. It must have had some really good shields. Wonderful. Exactly what they needed to help them get out of this mess. There's our ride. Let's get moving. Last one on board buys the drinks. There weren't any cheers or shit like that, but that got the whole group of pirates moving towards the landing zone. Nulia hung back around the middle of the group for maximum protection and to load up the listening program she had installed on every member of her group's Omni-tool. Screams, gunfire, and other general sounds of combat. Nothing she could use to tell which side was winning, but nothing that changed her plan to get the hell off this goddess-forsaken rock. Limerays had mentioned the leader of the Empire wouldn't hesitate to order an orbital bombardment if it suited her, and Nulia wasn't going to stay long enough to find out if that attitude was shared by the rest of the Empire's officers. Her group continued through the buildings in the hope that they would be undiscovered until they were in a position to sneak up on the shuttle. That hope was dashed when their group turned a corner and found a squad of Quarian Marines in some new design of dark grey armour. Contact! Blast them! Nulia cursed as bright red bolts of energy streaked by them as most of the pirates moved to dive into whatever cover they could find as fast as possible. She said most because one unfortunate bastard caught a bolt in the face. Kinetic shields barely did shit to plasma or energy shots, and without a helmet, half the poor Batarian's face was blasted off. At least his death was probably quick. The surviving members of her group started to return fire, but Nulia already knew this wasn't a fight they could win straight up. The Marines had kinetic shields and weapons that almost ignored the shields her group did. They probably had reinforcements on the way too, so Nulia needed to get moving. She popped out of cover and fired at one of the Marines until the old Banshee assault rifle overheated. Fucker didn't even have the courtesy to die either. He just screamed in pain as a shot finally got through his shields and armor and fell behind a crate, clutching at a bleeding shoulder. Nulia was still going to count it as a kill. With how fucked their immune systems were, chances are the Marine would drop dead from an infection a few days from now anyway. No amount of antibiotics would do shit about the polonium rounds weapon mod she had installed. Still, that was only one down compared to the There was a scream and a thud a few feet away. 4 that the Marines had killed. She needed to find a way to turn this fight around quickly. As if mocking that idea, one of the nearby doors exploded, and 2 Geth juggernauts walked in through the smoke. The pirates froze at the sight of the massive murder machines and only snapped out of it when they both focused on the one engineer in her group and hosed her down with their rifles. Between the 2 of them, the unfortunate Asari was nearly cut in half from the sudden onslaught of energy bolts, despite having one of the better armors in the group. That was it. Time to leave. "Everyone fall back!" she shouted, already running back the way they came. She needed to find Limray's ASAP. If anyone had a plan to get out of this mess, it was going to be that bitch. And Nulia was now at the point she didn't care what she had to do. She was going to be following along. Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 65. Nulia Dizero. P-O-V. Shit, shit, shit. Nulia chanted under her breath as her dwindling group of pirates ran through the mining complex. It wasn't enough that the Quarian Marines they had run into had better tech and gear than they did. It wasn't enough that the fuckers had giant murderous machines like the Geth backing them up. On top of all that, the fuckers were smart too. They fought like some kind of Turian death squad, always alert, moving, and intent on killing any pirates unfortunate enough to get pinned down. There were a lot of them too, at least a company worth, which meant that while the pirates might have outnumbered them at the beginning, it wasn't by all that much. Nulia's group had run into 2 more squads, and both times they had lost people before managing to run away without doing any significant damage to their enemies. "Damn, there goes another group," someone muttered, and Nulia looked to where he was talking about. It was an area below them, something probably used to service the mining vehicles going by the machinery, where another group of those dark-armoured Marines was slowly walking forward, red energy bolts flying while any incoming fire was stopped by their shields until they took a couple of hits and the Marines took cover, or in the case of the Geth units, simply ignored it thanks to their heavier armour. Nulia watched as the 5 remaining pirates' morale broke under the Imperial troopers' unrelenting advance, and they tried to run. The troopers simply and coldly gunned them down from behind. Shit! Fuckers were definitely playing for keeps. Where the fuck was Limrace? "Keep moving," Nulia ordered. "We don't stop until we find the Justicar and find a way out of this mess." "And if we run into another group of Marines, Captain?" one of her underlings asked. "Work together to shoot one bastard until he goes down and then move to the next. They have better shit than we do, but they aren't invincible." "We tried that," one of them grumbled. "Hiram died for it." Well, maybe the idiot should have learned to not peek out of cover without changing up the timing or direction. "Then do it better," she demanded bluntly. "We just need to bring down their shields fast enough. We can get off some biotics before they duck into cover." She wasn't strong enough to pull off a singularity, but just keeping those troopers out in the open long enough to actually score a kill was crucial with their dwindling numbers. And do what? Only 2 of us are even biotics, and Sul can barely lift a toothbrush since her amp broke. Fuck you, asshole! Nulia needed to stop this before an actual fight broke out. Normally jabbing at each other was fine, encouraged even to keep the idiots out of the way. But not when they were being herded into a corner by super-teched out kill teams. She took a step forward to properly yell at the idiots, only to feel a now familiar flash of heat pass right through the space her head used to occupy that was quickly replaced with the sensation of ice running down her back at the realization she just dodged death by pure luck. "Sniper, get moving!" She didn't wait to see if the others were following her. If they were too slow to get out of a kill box, they got what they deserved. The sound of several people running behind her proved at least some of them were smart enough to follow her lead, but there was no accounting for shit luck. Nulia took the first turn into a building to get out from the sniper's scope, and a few random turns she hoped led to the other side of the compound, only to run straight into another squad of Imperials. Both sides opened fire as soon as they registered who was in front of them, but Nulia's group was the one getting shredded. 1 or 2 Imperial Marines might have gone down, and half her group was so much dead weight. She looked around and spotted a smaller corridor nearby and didn't hesitate to shove the closest crew she could reach for it before following herself. A couple of the smarter members saw what she was doing and followed after, but the rest would serve as a distraction and hopefully stall the Imperials long enough for them to get away. It meant Nulia's group was now down to just the 5 of them, but she had already written off the entire raiding force at this point. All that mattered was that she got out alive. "We're fucked, we're so fucked, this is game over, man!" Hudson, one of the newer humans that had joined up, whined once they were far enough the sounds of gunfire couldn't be easily heard close by. "Shut up, Hudson! We're not out of this yet," Nulia snapped. "Does anyone know where we are?" "Near the centre of the facility," Dagrom, a Batarian and the only remaining engineer they had commented while consulting his Omnitool. Which is odd because this whole section should have been crawling with security even on a normal day. The main power generator for the whole facility should be just up ahead. "We didn't have anyone locking this place down?" Sul asked. And while Nulia was mildly pleased the other Asari was still alive, instead of some of the more boorish idiots that worked for her, she didn't appreciate Sulimia questioning her competence, even by implication. According to the engineers that tried, there was some kind of force field over the entrances they couldn't get through, so we ignored it. "Seems like security is down now, though," Nulia said, and waved a hand at a thick door that had been raised into the ceiling before a thought occurred to her. Justikar Limrays must have come through here. "Dagrom, shut and lock down this door. If we hurry, we might be able to catch up to her." "On it. It'll take a bit, though. For some reason the door is on an independent system and—" "Just get it done," Nulia interrupted. She didn't need a step-by-step plan, just the goddess-damn door closed. "I don't want those Imperials sneaking up behind us." "Too late! Here they come, boss." Nulia cursed and spun to look down the corridor they had just come from, half expecting to see another dozen Marines lined up to start gunning them down. So, when she only saw a pair of juggernauts and a single Asari-like figure in a hooded robe between them calmly walking towards their group, she was initially relieved. The 2 Geth would be hard to take down, but it was doable. Then the middle figure pulled something from her belt, and Nulia felt a chunk of ice form in the pit of her stomach as a bright red blade appeared with a snap hiss. "Dagrom? Door closed, right now," Nulia ordered briskly. "Everyone else, shoot the one in the middle." "The middle? What about the Sul started to backtalk, but Nulia didn't have time for her shit right now. If the hooded figure was anything like Limrays— "Shoot her now, damn it!" Nulia screamed, already unloading everything she could at the approaching figure, for all the good it did. The red blade turned into a spinning wall of light as the figure marched calmly forward, utterly dismissing the 4 people shooting at her as a threat. If that was all, Nulia would have been scared, but she wouldn't have freaked out over it. Limrays had done something similar when they had met to prove to the non-Asari members of the pirate group why Justicars were a group you did not fuck with. But when she did it, there was a weird sense of calmness. Like fighting her wasn't in anyone's interest, so it'd be better to just stop. This person was like a walking black hole. It didn't matter if you tried to fight it because it would just soak up anything you threw at it and then murder you once it was close enough. Fuck the Geth weren't even bothering to follow her or shoot back. Dagrom door! Working on it. Nulia cursed as her banshee overheated in her hands. She immediately dropped it and swapped to her pistol just to keep firing. Dagrom! Almost have it. Hudson's rifle was the next to overheat, which normally wouldn't have been a big deal since he had one of the newer models with the swappable heat sinks. But the panicky human fumbled the swap and ended up dropping the new heatsink. If it didn't mean it would be 2 less guns pointed at the enemy, Nulia would have shot him right there. She settled for cursing him out and telling him to stop fucking around with the one he dropped and just grab the second one on his belt. If they died because Hudson was too stupid to reload his gun. At this point, she could see the nearly featureless red and grey mask under the figure's hood. Close enough that in seconds they would all be within range of that weapon Nulia knew would cut through all of them like nothing. More out of desperation rather than anything, she flared her biotics and fired the strongest push she could muster. It just sucked shit that her best was barely middling compared to what the average huntress could do. Nowhere near enough to bother the monster stalking towards them as it simply raised a hand and seemingly absorbed the biotic energy like it was a gust of wind. Nulia felt more than saw Hudson try to run for it, the cowardly human deciding to abandon them and run the other way to live for just a few seconds longer. She didn't blame him. If she was a better person, she might have done the same. She wasn't, though. So the second he tried to run, she grabbed him by his hard suit, fully intending to throw him at the figure as a distraction so she could run instead. The only thing that stopped her from following through was a sudden shriek of metal and the security door slamming shut just a moment before the masked figure crossed the boundary. Nulia stared dumbly at the door, almost unwilling to believe that they escaped death for now. Then Hudson shifted in her grip, and she allowed herself to get angry. To show the others she was still in charge, that she wasn't afraid of that thing being kept away by a 1.5 feet of steel, even if that was a complete fucking lie. She slammed Hudson against the door and pinned him there with a forearm against his throat while jamming her pistol under his chin. I saw what you tried to pull, scum. If you ever, I mean ever, try running again without my orders, I will carve out your heart and brrskut. The sight of a red energy blade sticking a few inches from Hudson's chest stopped Nulia's rant in its tracks. She flinched back, incidentally dragging Hudson's body with her, and watched with the rest of her horrified group as the blade began to slowly, but effortlessly, cut a circular hole in the security door. Nulia felt that choking presence return and press down on her mind, a smothering feeling that almost reminded her of a meld gone horribly wrong. "Run along, little pirate," the presence seemed to hiss from the shadows. "Run to the Jedi and let them know I'm coming for them, and this time there is nowhere for them to run." Nulia didn't know if every member in her group heard the voice. She also didn't care. Without a second thought, she turned and fled down the corridor and only distantly recognized the sound of the others following after her. The only thought in her mind was that Limrays had to be ahead of them. She was Nulia's only hope of getting off this rock alive. Dash. Revan Empress. This unit has a query, one of the Sith Empress's bodyguards stated while Revan was busy cutting through the lowered security door. Why allow the pirates to escape? Allowing the Geth to engage would have been sufficient to disable or eliminate the group. The Juggernaut paused and seemed to consider something. If this query is inappropriate, there is no answer required. "I do not mind," Revan replied easily. "The purpose is simple. This Jedi has decided to distract my empire while we should be focused on the Reapers. Not only are they disrupting crucial logistics When entire solar systems are under siege, they are using pirates to do it. The same kind of scum that have terrorized the Terminus systems for decades. So I'm going to give our Jedi a choice. Help the pirates escape this place and fail their objective, or ignore their allies pleading for help and realize they aren't the beacon of light they think they are. Revan finished cutting and waved a hand at the door, forcing aside the now cut section and leaving a hole big enough for even the juggernauts to step through with a little crouching. Which option do you expect them to take? If this Jedi is anything like the ones I knew, they will attempt to do both, Revan said, and in doing so slow and stress themselves caring for a group they know are not innocents. I plan to use that to capture our enemy and force them to tell me about this order of theirs. The time to wait around playing with unknowns ended when the Reapers arrived. And if capture is not possible? No. Then it will make killing them easier, and we can return to fighting for the galaxy's survival. Any other questions? Negative, Revan Empress. Then let's continue on. Our little group of pirates have just managed to catch up with the Jedi. We don't want them to get separated again now, do we? Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 66. As Revan closed in on her target, she took a moment to check in on the other operations both inside the mining facility and in orbit. She sank her perception deeper into the Force and focused her farsight on the fleet first. Unsurprisingly, the pirate fleet was in full retreat, without having done much actual damage to her own battle group. Without the Jedi to give them an advantage, the pirate fleet was just an amalgamation of stolen, refurbished, or outdated ships, mostly chosen for speed and cargo capacity. Certainly one or two of the ships could put up a decent fight against something like a light cruiser, if the situation demanded it, but the rest were largely facing the problems that the migrant fleet had before Revan annexed them into the Empire. Poor maintenance, subpar repairs, aging weapons and technology. The average Turian patrol group would have been enough to destroy this fleet, let alone a harrower. The pirates obviously recognized that fact as well, because most of the fleet was accelerating away from the planet as fast as their engines could take them, while others looked like they were striking off independently. Those that were either too slow or had tried to fight back and were now getting picked apart by turbo laser fire, which meant besides the Jedi, the entire attacking force was basically dealt with within. Revan checked the timestamp from when her battle group first arrived in the system. 2 hours. Not a terrible time considering her military was still getting used to their new equipment and working together after 3 centuries of fighting a Cold War between themselves. But if they were going to retake worlds from the Reapers, they would have to be better. There had been moments of hesitation and confusion as groups ran into resistance or orders being unclear. Something normally unavoidable in a military operation outside rare occurrences, but when their enemies were enslaved to an overmind that could coordinate the entire battlefield at once, even those small errors could be fatal. Unfortunately, Revan could only rely on others to solve that issue. She made a note to bring up the errors with the officers in charge of the ground detachment just as she and her 2 Geth guards reached the final door to the central power generator. Unless she somehow slipped past Revan's senses, this is where the Jedi was waiting. It was the only place in the facility secure enough that the weapon Revan hinted was on this planet could be stored. A weapon that did not exist. The Empress wondered if the Jedi had realized that yet, or if assumptions and arrogance had blinded them to the possibility. The door opened as the group of 3 approached. Inside were the remaining survivors of the pirate group Revan had run into earlier, but they were not the Sith's focus. That was reserved for the Asari in black Justicar leathers, who was similarly watching Revan with absolute focus despite the leader of the pirate group screaming in her face. The pirates eventually noticed Revan's arrival as well. There were several spikes of fear from each one as they realized the Sith had caught up with them, followed by relief and acceptance as the Jedi muttered something to the group. Revan was half expecting it to be some promise she would protect them, or that Revan could be defeated by them working together, so she was actually surprised when the pirates simply ran deeper into the power generator, completely abandoning the Jedi to face Revan and her Geth alone. It was also more tactically sound than Revan was expecting, because while, yes, Revan currently had the Jedi outnumbered, she couldn't just leave pirates running around the main reactor without risking them either damaging something important and disabling the whole facility for an unknown amount of time at best, or them causing a reactor to go critical and kill them all in a massive explosion at worst. So Revan was left with no choice but to order her 2 bodyguards to hunt down the remaining pirates and leave the Jedi to her. As the 2 Geth juggernauts skirted the edge of the room before taking after the pirates, Revan stepped forward while pulling her second lightsaber to her hand with the Force, but left both of them off for now. "I'm surprised, Jedi. No attempts at all to protect your followers? It's thanks to you that they are being hunted down right now. I'd have thought you would at least try and work with the few that managed to reach you after you led them into a trap," Revan deliberately taunted. The Asari Jedi didn't react beyond reaching for her own saber. "You overestimate how much value I place on thieves and murderers, Sith. They served their purpose, and if they are finally punished for their crimes here, then that was simply the will of the Force." Revan frowned at the answer. That was very against the general attitude of the Jedi Order she was used to. Certainly there were individuals that had a more pragmatic outlook to killing or allies being killed, but not many of them would be as callously indifferent about their deaths as this Jedi seemed to be. Only those on the verge of falling would dismiss their deaths as punishment for past deeds. Either there had been some significant drift from when the Order was first established in this galaxy, or this Jedi Order followed a very different philosophy from what Revan was familiar with, because that remark was almost Sith-like. But then Ines Delisa had been more in line with what she had expected from a Jedi Master. Was it just different individual outlooks in the Order, separate factions, and how they operated? Revan didn't have enough information to know for sure. No matter. Obtaining a source of more information about the Jedi was the whole reason for this trap in the first place. After this, hopefully Revan would have a much clearer picture on who was attempting to stop her from saving the galaxy from the Reapers, and whether they did so out of dogma or incompetence. Is that so? Then know this, Jedi. I am Darth Revan, Empress of the Sith, and I will not allow you and your band of thieves and murderers to continue terrorizing the innocent citizens of my empire. I will give you one opportunity to surrender and face fair judgment for your crimes." Revan's words had their intended effect. The Jedi's eyes widened in disgusted disbelief that a Sith was proclaiming to be protecting the innocent from the Jedi, and immediately responded, "Any that willingly follow a Sith are not innocents. If they stand between us and our mission, they will be removed." The Empress looked around the generator room. "Yes, your mission to do what exactly?" she said sarcastically. "Besides killing miners and raiding transports carrying supplies for the refugees fleeing the Reapers. And don't say it was to draw me out so you could kill me. You obviously had no idea I would even be near this planet when you began your attack. Don't twist the truth, Sith. We know you have a weapon being developed here. You were not the first to attempt perverting the Saint Stones to cause harm. The goddess sent visions of your heresy, and I know that the people here are just shields for your ambition. I am Jedi Master Limray's Jatara, and your empire of darkness falls today." "How dramatic," Revan stated, lightsabers igniting in her hands. "As long as you ignore the Reapers burning their way across the galaxy. The Reapers that my empire is fighting while your order works to stab every sentient in the back." Limray's Jatora had no answer for that, none beyond igniting her own lightsaber and launching herself at Revan anyway. The Sith ducked under the attack and responded with a slash of her own that was quickly parried as the two fell into a deadly dance of blades. Dash, oh dash. Talizora, Vaz Normandy, P.O.V. The last group of pirates located in this sector have been eliminated, ma'am. We're ready to move on your orders. Tali desperately wanted the fidget with her hands as everyone looked at her but somehow held off. She had some experience with leading people as the head of a science team, but that wasn't the same as being an admiral. What drugs had the Admiralty Board loaded their suits with that they thought promoting her to fill the empty spot left by her father had been a good idea? Thank you, Rhaegar. Any sign of enemy reinforcements? She asked, mostly to buy time to compose herself. Nothing coming groundside that we can detect, and if they manage to slip something past the fleet, we have topside. I'll eat Vol's rifle, the Marine replied, getting an offended glare from his squad mate. Not your own? Tali asked, curiously, knowing that wasn't how that phrase was typically used. Rhaegar huffed indignantly. Of course not. My rifle is a meticulously maintained precision instrument. Vol's is just mass-produced garbage you can grab in any old armory. They're the same damn rifle, Vol protested. We were issued them at the same time. And I can hit a target from 500 meters with mine, while yours can't hit a bulkhead from the inside of a ship. Tali chuckled at the byplay and felt some of the tension bleed out of her shoulders. All right, if we're sure the way is clear, we can begin transporting the rescued miners to one of the other facilities. Aye, ma'am. Rhaegar straightened up and lost some of his joking tone. We'll also have squads start making sweeps for any traps or sabotage the pirates might have left behind. Tali hadn't even considered that, but she had learned enough about leadership from Shepard that sometimes it was better to just act like you already knew what was going on when a subordinate made a good suggestion. Do it. And speaking of sabotage, have we resecured the main generator? I haven't heard anything after the security alerts sent the notification that the doors had been overridden. Not yet, but we were told Empress Revan was heading there personally to deal with the leader of the pirate fleet, so it should just be a matter of time. Tali nodded at that. It was hard to imagine a pirate doing much to stand up to the force of nature Revan seemed to be. Just when she was about to excuse herself and let the Marines get back to doing their jobs, one of the Geth stepped forward. Tali Admiral, we believe there is an anomaly that requires your judgment, they said, and immediately produced a data tablet showing one of the security feeds. On it was a group of workers exiting a security door of some kind before a young-looking Asari walked up to them. The group looked cautious and afraid until the Asari just waved a hand and said something. The workers simply let her join their group after, so Tali wasn't exactly sure what she was supposed to be looking for. When this group was secured by an Imperial squad in the area, all individuals were asked to provide identification. This individual was identified as Tevizra Nuraora, a member of the cleaning staff. Tali racked her brain trying to think of why the Geth would call out this Asari in particular. The obvious answer was an infiltrator, but if that was all, they would have simply notified the squad that brought that group in and apprehend her. Is she not in the system? Tevizra Nuraora appears in several systems as a newly hired employee that has been on site for the past 3 months. When other members of the group were asked about her presence, several of them confirmed that she had been present for at least that long. What's the problem, then? Tevizra Nuraora appears in several separate systems. However, upon reviewing the facility's security footage, for the past 3 months, the Geth have been unable to locate her once before today. Definitely an infiltrator, then. And one that was only caught because the Geth could review months' worth of footage in minutes. But then how did she convince the other workers that they knew her in seconds? Tali had a sinking feeling in her stomach as she asked the Geth to provide all the images they had of Tevizra. A feeling that was confirmed when one of the earliest of them showed a familiar metal cylinder peeking out from the Asari's probably stolen jacket. There was a second Jedi among the pirates' forces, and they had at least 15 hostages nearby that would be put in danger if Tali didn't handle this correctly. Mass Effect, Knight of the Old Republic, Chapter 67. Red and blue lightsabers collided and locked as the enemy Jedi attempted to pin Revan in place, only to slide off again as Revan relaxed and slid around her opponent like a river. Her second saber swung down, aiming to remove the Jedi's kneecaps, but missed as the Jedi lightly hopped over the glowing blade. A far cry from the dramatic flips and leaps her opponent had been using earlier in their duel. No acrobatics that time. "Are you getting tired, Jedi?" Revan questioned as she pressed the attack. But unfortunately, the Jedi's defense was still solid, even if it had shifted to a more economical style. You can only maintain your corrupted force techniques so long. Even if you hide it, the dark side will always struggle against the light and the goddess. Limrays argued back, which almost made Revan openly scoff. She was starting to understand why the Jedi she had come across so far had seemed so confident sending only a single knight after her. And then, why a single master, one that didn't specialize in combat even, felt she would be enough to handle a Sith lady. Revan was willing to bet that this galaxy had never had a proper dark side sect, or at least not one that survived long enough to pass down its teachings. If the Jedi here really were more militant than the ones she was familiar with and actively hunted down and destroyed any Force user that didn't follow their tradition, as they seem to be so far, then Revan supposed the strongest Sith would be fallen Jedi, simply brute, forcing their techniques in ways that harmed the user for more immediate power. It probably never occurred to Limrace that a Sith could use the Force for long without that damage, let alone using both sides like Revan did, that made her able to stand against several of the greatest masters in her own galaxy for a decent length of time, and certainly not that Revan could outlast a master like herself. Limrace probably thought that if she was tiring, then Revan had to be exhausted and was just masking the signs. "Perhaps you are just out of shape from watching your pirate friends attack innocents," Revan stated as she dodged a counterstrike. "There are no innocents when they are working with a Sith," Limrace reiterated her earlier opinion. "Not when it comes to removing the greatest evil in the galaxy." Revan's attacks picked up speed, her two sabers probing every presented weakness the Jedi Master presented and forcing her entirely on the defensive. The greatest evil. You are either willfully ignorant or just blind. You've attacked my empire. You've seen the people just living their lives until you attacked for simply being under my banner while ignoring the Reapers destroying entire planets. And you have the gall to judge me worse than them. You would corrupt the Force itself, Limrace gasped as a lightsaber narrowly missed removing one of her arms. "Once you are destroyed, the Order will deal with the Reapers." Revan batted away a feint and dodged a sneakily positioned object meant to hit her from behind by a biotic pull. "The Reapers have existed millions of years longer than your Order. You underestimate the scope of the problem because you refuse to acknowledge you were wrong. Let me show you exactly what you are up against." The Sith suddenly lashed out and smashed the Asari Jedi's saber aside. Instead of using the opening to kill her opponent, Revan dropped one of her lightsabers to grab the Asari by her head, using the physical connection to amplify the telepathic connection she used to force several memories into the Jedi's mind. Memories of reports about the first appearance of the Reapers her scouts had sent back, mixed with some of Revan's own, where she had used Farsight to observe the Reapers' tactics directly. Of Batarian planets being razed while sentients of all species were gathered up by the machine's slaves. Of how the people with sufficient biomass were impaled on dragon teeth devices to be slowly converted into husks, alive or dead, and younglings were separated out and shoved into the same pods the collectors had used on the captured human colonists. Revan even included memories of how those pods would be used to melt their captives into a biological slurry to be used in other ways by the Reapers. Limrace instinctively fought against the flow of information, and while Revan could have fought to keep the connection going, she didn't want to risk damaging her potential information source and allowed herself to be pushed back. "Still think the Sith are the greater evil, Jedi?" Instead of answering, Limrace fell back into a defensive stance and visibly tried to recover. Revan wasn't going to give her the chance, surging forward and attacking from various angles so the Jedi couldn't fully settle long enough to center herself while keeping up her mental attacks. You say your order will deal with the Reapers? How? With what army? What navy? Visions of Palavan burning while battered Turian fleets tried to drive off the Reapers slipped past Limrace's defences. The Citadel races are divided, and the Asari on their own don't have the power or the numbers. We have the Force, came the expected reply, but Revan could tell her enemy was shaken by what she had been shown. Her arms trembled every time she blocked one of the Empress's attacks. We have the Goddess. You have dogma and false promises, Revan said bluntly. That's why your order is so determined to fight me, because I am Sith. Because it is easier to focus on a known enemy of old than admit they are unprepared to fight the actual threat to the galaxy, one that you have no chance of defeating like you usually operate, as blades in the dark. Anger, hot and searing, flickered in Limrace's mind. Revan was once again pushed back, but this time it was because Limrace had touched on the more physical side of the Force, or, in other words, the dark side. We are the swords of light, the protectors of the galaxy. Then why are you here fighting miners and civilians when there is a threat to the galaxy out there? Revan interrupted. You were building a weapon, corrupting a Saint Stone and creating something you would use against us. That was what drew you to this planet. But you were raiding my empire well before that. And even if I was, so what? The weapons I create, I use to destroy the Reapers. Out in the open, instead of sneaking around like the bandits your order seems to prefer. Limrace went on the attack, her earlier precision and grace absent as she attempted to simply overpower the Sith. Lies. We hunt your kind wherever they hide, dig you out of every wretched corner, all to keep you from twisting the teaching left to us. Revan weathered the attack even as she redoubled her mental assault. Limrace certainly tried to shield her mind, but the Sith was too skilled, too practiced at slipping past defences of masters, far more used to mental combat than a master that may have faced an acolyte at one point, at best. More visions assaulted the Jedi, the collector base and what the Reapers had twisted the Protheans into. Seeker swarms darkening cities, while husks dragged struggling sentients out into the streets. Starships racing to flee the main bodies of the Reapers in orbit and being picked off by the tentacled machines. And then the tone changed. Images of Revan fighting alongside Commander Shepard in the heart of the Omega-4 relay base. The Empire's ships destroying the Reapers over Palavan. Imperial soldiers fighting slavers, pirates, and even small incursions of collectors on planets throughout the Terminus systems. A bombardment of visions and images of the Sith Empire fighting against the general scum of the galaxy, as well as the invaders, and not only just fighting, but winning as well. Revan felt a massive crack in Limrace's fraying self-control when Revan included the raid the Jedi's pirate fleet had initiated, followed by an older vision of a Reaper scout being destroyed using similar tactics as her battle group did over this planet. Neatly comparing the two in a way the Asari did not appreciate. All she needed to do was give the Jedi just one more push. This is what the Sith Empire, my empire, has accomplished against the Reapers. What has your order done besides help them and hide in the dark, hoping the monsters will pass them by? She pressed, subtly using the Force to guide the Jedi's reactions. Encouraging and enforcing her doubts that appeared showing how outmatched the Turians had been at their homeworld, suppressing ingrained justifications and reinforcing certain lines of thought. It wasn't outright mind control. Even a distracted Jedi's mind was too powerful to succumb to such in such a short amount of time. But it was enough for Revan to shape the directions her opponent's thoughts would go, even once she retreated fully from the Jedi's mind. And ironically, this sort of manipulation was even more effective on zealots like Limrays seemed to be simply because once their most common justifications were denied to them, there was nothing for them to fall back on that would alert them to their altered mental state. And eventually the new thought patterns that emerged would be just as strong or even stronger than the originals. Limrays made one final attack, a single overhead slash with everything she had behind it that Revan caught between her own blades. The two briefly struggled as the Jedi Master tried to physically overpower Revan, but it was quickly apparent in her compromised mental state the Sith Empress could easily hold her off. The Order has a plan to deal with the Reapers. They have to, Limrays whispered quietly, desperately. Otherwise we would have been indirectly working with the Reapers to destroy the only real obstacle to their victory, because your Order couldn't admit they failed to prepare, Revan finished bluntly. Then why have they not announced it? Why are they sneaking through shadows instead of meeting the Reapers' armies on the battlefield? It's simple. They don't have a plan. They don't have the numbers to change the tide coming for them. All they can do is pretend while the end comes for them. The Asari's face crumpled and she disengaged a few feet back. That can't be true. Search your feelings. Why else would you be sent to act as a pirate when the smarter, better path is to unify against a common threat? Revan pressed. It's because they have given up. But just because they did does not mean you have to. Revan put away one of her lightsabers and held out a hand. Join me, the Empress offered. And together we will fight to actually save this galaxy instead of following old grudges simply to soothe the egos of a few sentients that fail to prepare for this threat while they wait for destruction. The Sith's offer hung in the resulting silence for a few moments before Limrays Jatora, Jedi Master, deactivated her lightsaber and bowed her head in submission. Mass Effect, Knight of the Old Republic, Chapter 68. The surrender of Limrays marked the end of any significant resistance from the attacking pirates. A small security force would be left behind to both reassure the miners and deal with any stragglers that managed to hide from the Marines, as unlikely as it was that any escaped, while the rest would return to the fleet in orbit. But as pleased as Revan was that her goal of luring out and dealing with the pirate fleet attacking her logistics network had been completed, and that she had successfully secured the Jedi leading it as well, it was still a distraction from dealing with the main threat to the galaxy. She simply couldn't afford to spend much more time on such a remote planet when there were so many other demands on her time throughout the Empire. So receiving an urgent message from Tali Zora almost immediately after entering her shuttle had Revan on edge. Only, in an extremely rare moment for her, to be rendered speechless by the contents of the message. Dash, oh Dash. Give me a full report, Admiral Zora, Revan demanded as she marched past the Quarian into the Harrower's hangar. Understanding how serious the matter was, Tali Zora simply fell in step with the Empress, even though Revan could tell she was very curious about the sudden appearance of an Asari on the Sith's shuttle. The newly promoted Admiral was good at following sudden orders, though, and immediately launched into a much fuller report than the summary she forwarded earlier. Of course, Empress Revan. As I said earlier, the infiltrator was first identified by the Geth, noticing an unknown that appeared in several systems but had never been caught on the security cameras outside of today, despite the time she was supposedly here. I had the Geth search through all recordings of her, and discovered her storing an object that was very similar to one of your lightsabers. Between that and another incident caught on camera, I had to assume she was one of the Jedi you warned us about. Revan accepted a datapad with the images Tali Zora had described, an Asari storing what looked like a lightsaber hilt, and a short video of the same Asari performing a mind trick to integrate with another group. Limrays, do you recognize her? Revan asked the new acolyte. Tavizra Nuraora, Limrays said, confusion radiating off her through the Force. She was the knight that helped me uncover the location of the Saint Holocron when we heard about it being used for a potential weapon, I had asked her to accompany me at the time, but she claimed she had another mission to attend to. So why? Revan made a noise of acknowledgement. There were several reasons why this Tevisra could have hid her presence from her fellow Jedi, but the most likely one to Revan was that this other Asari was something similar to a Jedi shadow and had planned to use Limraze's attack on the mining facility to more easily infiltrate deeper into the Empire. All newcomers would be under a certain amount of scrutiny thanks to the condition of the rest of the galaxy, but there would be worlds of difference between a random Asari coming from Citadel or Republic space and one that had been displaced because of a pirate attack on an Imperial world. Limraze shook her head and said in a clearly conflicted tone, "We should try to capture her now before she discovers she was exposed. Tevisra is very adept at concealing herself, even in places where Asari stick out." "About that," Talizora shifted awkwardly. "We captured her not long before you boarded the shuttle. We just don't know how to keep someone like her prisoner for long, which is why we urgently requested Revan, Empress Revan, to help deal with her." "How the hells did you manage that?" Limraze exclaimed, just as shocked at the outcome as Revan had been when she got Talizora's message. "She had joined up with a group of miners, so we needed to separate her from potential hostages. Half of them were easily separated by loading them into 2 separate shuttles, with the excuse that we were evacuating all civilians to either one of the 2 other facilities or to one of the ships in orbit," Talizora began to explain. "It helped that it was the truth, and I directed her shuttle here. Then, when they were going through decontamination, I ordered the Geth to add an aerosolized soporific to knock her out, but it didn't work. We managed to separate another few more of the workers when the shuttle landed by saying they would be getting checkups from the medical staff. Splitting them into Levo and Dextro-based groups wouldn't raise too many suspicions, but there were still 4 around her, and from what we could see she was getting suspicious, especially when the rest of her group started falling asleep. If she didn't know you had discovered her for certain, Tevisra would likely try to avoid anything that would draw attention to her. But she would still be able to sense danger coming her way through the Force even passively," Limraze said. "I'd have expected her to try slipping away at that point and concealing herself again." Talizora nodded. "We expected that, which is why once we got as many people as far away as we could, 6 squads of Geth and a few combat drones engaged her with stunners and knockout grenades. So to put it simply, Talizora drugged the Jedi with a sleeping agent, separated her from as many hostages and complications as possible, isolated her from any leverage or potential distractions, and then overwhelmed her with disposable numbers." "Well done, Admiral Zora," Revan complimented. By no means was it a particularly inspired strategy, but Revan wouldn't dismiss it as trivial because while it was simple, Talizora's method was also something that hundreds of commanders' strategies when dealing with Force adepts from any sect were not. Successful, she would have to come up with a proper reward some other time. That would have to wait, however, because the 3 of them had arrived at the brig where Tevisra was being held, and while the Asari was currently still unconscious, Revan could see several problems that would need to be addressed if they wanted to keep a Jedi contained for long. For one, the door controls would have to be disabled and rerouted to another control panel, preferably one in another room. The cell door mechanisms themselves would need to either be replaced or reinforced with a force field. And since keeping the Asari unconscious through sedatives was both costly and inefficient, new physical restraints would be needed. Revan wasted no time issuing the orders for those and several other smaller issues that would make a cell theoretically inescapable for the Jedi, which would hopefully buy enough time for her to address the issue of suddenly having another captive Jedi for later, once she had fully secured Limraze's loyalty, instead of relying on Force persuasion and the Asari's own unbalanced mentality. And Revan knew from personal experience how quickly a Force-shifted mentality could be shifted again with the right levers. "Once again, very well done, Admiral Zora," Revan said, shaking off those thoughts for now. "Unfortunately, the reward for good work is usually more work. Reorganize the battle group and prepare to leave the system." Now that we've destroyed the pirate fleet attacking our logistics, there is another target we need to take care of before we can shift our attention back to the Reapers." "Aye, Ma'am." Talizora nodded seriously and rushed off to complete her orders, leaving Revan and Limrace on their own. "And do not think I've forgotten about you, my new acolyte. I think it is time I finally get some answers about your old order." Dash. "Well then, can't say I expected to meet a living Prothean today," Garrus remarked dryly. "One that wasn't stuffed full of Reaper tech and shooting at me anyway." Shepard let out a long breath at her friend's remark. She had already been expecting it, but Eden Prime hadn't turned out to be an easy mission. Cerberus had destroyed the local Alliance garrison, was actively kidnapping the remaining colonists all over the planet, and had managed to dig up more Prothean artifacts not far from where the beacon that first warned them about the Reapers had been found. Not that she knew it at the time. One of those artifacts being a stasis pod that not only remained functional for 50,000 years, but contained a living Prothean, had been a twist she never would have seen coming. Even now, several hours after they had confirmed that their new guest on the ship, Javik, had no complications from his incredibly long nap, Shepard didn't know if he was a blessing or a curse for their fight against the Reapers. On the one hand, Javik had spent his entire life fighting against the Reapers and would be a treasure trove of information about what strategies were and were not effective. On the other, once he had shared that information, Javik was just one more gun in the fight. An important one to be sure, considering not only his personal skill, but also what his species represented to the wider galaxy. But Shepard couldn't help but wish they had lucked out and gotten another Revan, a warrior and scientist that would be able to actually explain what the Crucible was for and how it worked. Someone that could convince the Sith Empress that the device's construction was absolutely needed, or inform the Alliance they needed to shift the resources elsewhere if the Crucible was just a failed plan to begin with. Or, failing that, just providing the rest of the Alliance with the scientific breakthroughs the Protheans took for granted during their time that would give the rest of them that much more of an edge over the Reaper forces. "It was definitely a surprise," she replied. "Shame that in the few minutes we've got him talking, he's also uprooting every commonly held preconception about Prothean civilization," Garrus continued. "Liara is going to be devastated." "She's taking it pretty well so far," Shepard argued tepidly. Finding out the Protheans hadn't been the benevolent rulers of the galaxy most commonly thought of them was not much a concern for the human commander. She hadn't thought much about the precursor race her entire life until one of their devices had shoved a bunch of memories into her skull. And even then, understanding it had been more about chasing Saren than anything about the Protheans themselves. Liara had spent almost the same amount of time researching and theorizing about their society, only for the genuine article to be about as far from the image the galaxy had crafted as possible. For now, and that's only because Havik is all shiny and, well, not new, but freshly discovered, Garrus argued back. Once that's worn off, I don't think she's going to be thrilled the glorious Prothean Empire was ruled by a join-up-or-die policy. I'm sure she'll adapt, but as much as I'd like to keep talking about our newest guest, you said you got a message I needed to see. Garrus nodded and was suddenly all business. Yeah, and I don't think you're going to like it. What else is new? Lay it on me. We got some news from a shared acquaintance of ours, a Cerberus prison facility where they've been sending anyone that resists them taking over. Shepard scowled. Garrus was right, she didn't like it. God knew what Cerberus would do to anyone they kept prisoner, but the shortlist was pretty much down to unethical science experiment and indoctrination into one of their soldiers with both as another possible answer. They were going to have to do something about that. I assume the coordinates are already uploaded to the galaxy map. Ready and waiting. I take it that means we are going to assault a heavily defended location on our own again? Shepard quirked an eyebrow. What, getting cold feet on me, Garrus? Oh, not at all. I just wanted to know what the plan was to actually deal with the prisoners once we rescue them. I like screwing with Cerberus as much as the next Turian, but I'd rather not spend a few days with panicked civilians packed in like sardines. Don't worry about that, Shepard replied, pulling up her Omnitool. I've got some pull with someone that can handle that part of the mission for us. Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 69. The Normandy slipped silently into the system, but Shepard waited until EDY gave the all clear before she relaxed. The stealth systems had been holding up so far, but the first Normandy had proved that they weren't infallible. And Cerberus had been the one to build the SR2 in the first place, so it was reasonable that out of all organizations to have something that would counter those systems when even the Reapers had trouble finding them while they were running quiet, it would be them. Shepard still didn't dismiss the possibility that Cerberus had a counter. But if they did, it hadn't made it out to such a remote system. Which was definitely a good thing for her crew, because Cerberus did happen to have several cruisers instead, along with a handful of smaller vessels. Clearly they were using the previously unreported system as a staging ground for their operations in addition to their prison. "Shit, Commander, you really want to get close to all that?" Joker asked, even as he drifted the ship closer to the planet they were told about. "If we get spotted, that's a lot of firepower to go up against on our own." "Better hope your clumsy flying doesn't get us spotted then." Shepard shot back lightly. "Besides, if everything goes to plan, Cerberus will be too busy to deal with us." "Right? Because things always go to plan with us." "That's the spirit." Shepard shot him a grin. "Okay, EDI, let's let our friends know we're here. Go ahead and send the comm burst over to the planet. If our friends are where they said they were, we should get a call pretty soon after. Once we get confirmation forward, the connection to my Omnitool." "Affirmative, Shepard. Sending communication now. EWAR and stealth systems ready at maximum operational levels." EDI reported. Minutes trickled by while they waited to hear from their contact with Joker, and EDI obsessively checked for signs they had been discovered by Cerberus. Shepard had hovered behind them for a bit, but when it became clear it was going to take a while to get a response back, she left to take her place back in the CIC until they got word just in case they needed to scuttle the mission and come back with a different approach. Shepard was actually moments away from ordering the Normandy to move to the secondary position and send another comm burst when EDI forwarded an active call to her station. "Hey, Shep. I'd say sorry for taking so long to respond, but you got here a hell of a lot faster than I expected. I guess you managed to cash in some favors if the Alliance was willing to send a battle fleet so quickly." The voice of Kasumi Goto greeted her. There was no video since they were trying to keep any chance of interception as low as possible, but it was still good to hear the infiltration specialist and thief's voice. The commander even said as much. "Good to hear from you too, Kasumi. No luck on an Alliance battle fleet, though. Everything they have is tied up somewhere else." "Well, I hope you have a good backup plan then, because once things get loud down here, I don't think even you can deal with everything in orbit." "I have one. We were just waiting on your call to make sure everything was in place before calling them in. Once they show up, we'll be on a timer to release all of Cerberus's prisoners and clear the facility, plus whatever side mission you have that convinced you to call me in the first place." "I'm not getting predictable now, am I? How'd you know?" "You're not the type to hang around unless there was something you wanted, Kasumi," Shepard replied. "If all you found was a Cerberus prison facility, you would have dropped me the coordinates and moved on before they caught wind of you. The fact that you're still there means they have something you want and can't sneak out with that fleet in orbit. If it was just an issue of getting it out, you would have just asked for my help slipping out on the Normandy, not ask me to bring a battle group. That means whatever you're after is sensitive enough that even getting to it is going to grab the attention of the ships in orbit, or big enough that the Normandy can't sneak it out. That sound about right?" "You know, Shep, if you talked like that all the time, people wouldn't keep assuming you're just another soldier good with a gun. Garrus better watch out, or you'll steal his detective title away from him." Shepard smiled. "Can't make it to N7 without picking up a few tricks along the way. So how close was I?" "Almost spot on. There's a database in the prison facility that has all kinds of juicy records Cerberus wouldn't want getting out. Transfer manifestos for prisoners, arrival and departure records for their ships, locations of more hidden outposts, and even some info on some backers financing their operations. Any one of those things getting out would be a blow to Cerberus's operations, especially the hands of the right party. It only made sense that something like that was locked up tight to prevent someone exactly like Kasumi from getting to it. And while Cerberus is occasionally stupid about security, this time they went all out. The database is air-gapped and secured in a vault that rivals Hawk's in paranoia. And unlike his, this one is nearly physically impossible to open without at least 2 people. Even trying will trigger a facility-wide alert, and probably an even wider-reaching one if no one clears the first. Well, that certainly explained why the thief needed a distraction for the ships in orbit. If Cerberus was being that serious about security, there was almost no way she would be able to grab everything before someone noticed her. And with that kind of info, Shepard wouldn't put it past them to simply destroy the facility to make sure nothing got out if it seemed likely. It was the kind of callous, for the greater good of Cerberus thinking she would expect from them. So, what's the plan then? Well, the original plan was to have your Alliance friends hit the group in orbit while your team snuck down here. The facility will still go into alert, but Cerberus shouldn't send reinforcements if they're kept busy enough. We'll still be on a timer, though. If we wait too long, the database will purge itself and all that information will be gone. Poof. Just like that. So I hope whoever you brought along is good enough to cover for us. Don't worry about that. There'll be more than enough, Shepard assured her. Does that mean you're ready to go whenever? Ready whenever you are. Just don't keep me waiting too long. The call ended, and Shepard stepped away from the CIC. It's time to make a call and get her team ready for a ground assault. Dash-o-dash! Revan stood silently on the bridge of her harrower as she watched the blue whirls of hyperspace swirl past in the ship's transparasteel viewports while she thought about what she had learned from her new acolyte. There had not been enough time to properly delve into the Order's history, like Revan would prefer when learning about a new Force sect, but she had managed to at least to get a clearer understanding of what was set against her. And a definite blessing, since aside from some parts regarding the structure and some teachings around the nature of the Force, the Order in this galaxy could not be further from the Jedi Order in her own. Both were led by a High Council made up of several masters, and were generally separated into 4 categories of aspirant, Padawan, knight, and finally, master. But while the Jedi in the Skyriver galaxy had several paths to mastery, the Order here only officially recognized a member as a master if they successfully trained a Padawan to knighthood. That was it. And while that was certainly a recognized path to mastery in her old Order, here, even being the best blade master in the organization would mean the individual would only be a knight. Something that made sense when Revan compared the 2 masters she had encountered and found them not much more powerful than the knight that ambushed her and made her aware of the Jedi in the first place. Beyond that, the 2 orders were as different as night and day. Her old Order promoted cooperation between different species as equals, while this newer one was very blatantly a Sari supremacist. Her Order venerated the Force and openly debated various interpretations on its nature, while this one claimed the Force came from a singular goddess and non-Asari were unworthy of its use. Where her Order operated out in the open, this one worked mostly through the shadows or using the Justicars as a shield for their activities. Revan would almost call it Sith-like if it wasn't for the complete rejection of anything dark and the unwavering dedication to the code they swore to. An extension of the Justicar code even, but seemingly more relaxed in places from what Limrays briefly explained. Instead, their teachings and attitude reminded her greatly of the ancient pious Dea religion from millennia ago. And if that was the case, Revan would need to assume these Jedi as a whole would default to seeing any other species as somewhat lesser at least, and only useful so long as their use benefited a Sarakind. She would have to continue talking with Limrace about the Order later to confirm her opinion and the attitude she would need to take when interacting with these Jedi soon. But there had simply been no time when Shepard had sent an urgent message regarding a Cerberus facility she was about to attack and needed support with. Revan might not have been able to justify being so quick to come to her comrades. Friends aid when the Reapers were not directly involved, but Cerberus was proving to be a destabilizing element wherever they popped up. A few more instances like what happened on Surkesh and Citadel Space would be more interested in securing their own territories instead of cooperating against the invaders until it was too late. And the Empire could not survive the full attention of the Reapers alone. They did not have the ships. So Revan would gladly leap to deal the terrorist organization a blow like removing a few of their void assets, even if she hadn't been informed of the prison facility they were guarding. "Lightspeed deceleration in 20 seconds, ma'am," one of the bridge officers called out behind her. "Sound the ready alarm for all shuttles then," Revan ordered calmly. "We'll do a micro-jump in-system and then use sublight engines to approach the planet. Once we establish air cover, the Marines will deploy to the surface and secure the prison facility." That being said, Revan turned and started walking for the hangar herself. This time she was not trying to lure out a meddlesome Jedi, so she would lead the assault from the beginning. Shepard hadn't had the full details of what the facility contained when she had called for help, but Revan had a feeling that there was plenty to be found, inside that Cerberus would very much prefer neither she nor the human Spectre got their hands on, and the Empress was keen on making sure they would be disappointed in the end. Plus, she had an acolyte to evaluate. "Limrace, find Admiral Talizora and meet me in Hangar Bay 1. We will be joining the first wave of the assault." "As you command, my master." Mass Effect. Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 70. Captain Das Baut Vaz Imperial steadied himself as his Harrower-class Star Destroyer decelerated from lightspeed just outside the Cerberus-held planet's gravity well and immediately started barking orders to get them in formation while preparing their fighter screens for launch. He felt it was largely unneeded, since the Empress and Admiral had both outlined the plan before the battle group had even arrived in the system, and his crew knew their jobs well enough without him hovering over their shoulders. But the military loved repetition and redundancy. Das Baut didn't mind in this instance, however. If there was one enemy Das wanted everything to run smoothly when fighting them besides the Reapers, it was against Cerberus. An opinion held by most Quarians after the human terrorist group nearly bombed the migrant fleet to cover up kidnapping a human biotic the fleet had taken in. Something that would have spelt disaster for countless Quarians before the Empress had managed to secure Rannoch once again and brought the fleet home. Das could hardly think of any other group more deserving of a few Fulisades from the Imperial. "Cerberus cruisers moving away from the planet, Captain," the officer in charge of the sensors reported. "They're going to intercept us before we reach the shuttle drop zone." "Our orders from the flagship?" "Unchanged, Captain," the comms officer replied. Das smiled under his environmental suit. "Well, in that case, as soon as they are within range, pluck out their eyes." Before the reunification that created the Sith Empire, the migrant fleet had been too desperate for any working ships to afford turning their noses up at any that came their way. If it was space-worthy and could be patched up without a repair dock, the Quarians would use it. But that didn't mean there hadn't been preferences around designs. Viewports and windows were often seen as additional risks on warships for a multitude of reasons. So when they had the chance, most ship captains would cover or even outright remove them if possible. A trend that most of the galaxy seemed to slowly be following, with the Geth logically being the furthest along, simply removing them and any life support systems from their designs altogether and relying solely on sensors to detect things around them. At least until the Normandy had shown exactly how dangerous that kind of thinking could be when, according to Admiral Zora, all it had taken to infiltrate a Geth space station without a single alarm going off was simply flying up to it because the Geth had been fooled by the frigate's stealth systems. So when the first few harrowers started construction, no one, not even the Geth, protested the inclusion of cameras or viewports in the design. But there had been several concerns about the primary bridge's location and vulnerability, at least until the Empress showed off why such a design had survived so long in her own galaxy, despite the numerous wars over several millennia. "Cerberus cruisers in range, Captain. Fire the screamer torpedoes," Dasbaot ordered with an eager wave of his arm. "Aim spot lasers at the cameras on the closest cruiser and begin turbo-laser bombardment. Launch all fighter wings and try to draw attention away from the shuttles." Space erupted into a cacophony of junk noise as the screamers did their best to overwhelm the Cerberus ship's sensors, while high-intensity lasers turned the camera feeds they struck into meaningless white voids. Nothing that a dedicated technician couldn't overcome, which unfortunately meant these tactics were largely useless on the Reapers, but Dasbaot could already see the enemy cruisers slow their maneuvers thanks to suddenly being struck blind and deaf from such a low-tech attack, along with the more conventional EWAR measures. One thing was certain: the humans would not enjoy this battle in the slightest. Dash, oh dash. Air defences are too tight up ahead even with our new friends distracting them. "Looks like this is as close as I can get, Commander," Cortez said as the Kodiak landed just outside the prison facility. Shepard wasted no time leaping out of the dropship and sweeping for enemies while her team fanned out behind her. "Roger that. We'll give you a call if we need a lift," she said even as one of the fighters screaming overhead was clipped by the defences and started trailing smoke across the sky. At this point, trying to sneak up to the facility would be mostly pointless, and the longer her team was out in the open, the bigger the chance was that they would be targeted they couldn't deal with. So fast assault it was. "We're moving fast, people. I want everyone stacked up on this gate as quickly as possible. Garrus, keep an eye out for snipers. Liara, see if you can raise Kasumi. We're going to need her help getting inside if we can't hack the controls. Shepard, I'd like to remind you that even like this, I retain all my capabilities from when I was solely restricted to the Normandy. Standard Cerberus firewalls will not keep me out for long," EDI commented, sounding almost insulted. Shepard thought she wouldn't be able to get them in. "Not doubting you, EDI. Just covering our bases in case Cerberus used a mechanical switch," Shepard placated. Not that it was needed in the end. Thankfully, Cerberus had used a more conventional mechanism for the gate controls, which meant the ground team barely needed to slow down before they were in the facility. Shepard quickly consulted the map Kasumi had provided and pointed her team in the direction of the control center. Her team would be responsible for releasing the prisoners, while Revan's Marines would handle securing them and getting them away from Cerberus. And speaking of Cerberus, "Contact!" Shepard turned to see a squad of Guardians round a corner and drive their shields into the ground, while several more troopers used them as cover or moved behind metal barriers that dotted the street. "Javik, Liara, pull those shields away. Everyone else focus fire," Shepard ordered as she joined the other biotics in ripping the heavy metal shields away from the Guardians and leaving them open for her teammates' blaster fire. Even Cerberus's heavy armor simply melted as dozens of red energy bolts found their targets, their kinetic shields not doing much to them, or the thin green beam Javik's particle rifle spat out. To Shepard's amusement, though, Javik was forced to stop firing after a few seconds while his weapon vented heat, and the rest of the team's weapons could still keep firing. Maybe this mission would be the thing that actually convinced him to give a weapon that hadn't been sitting in storage for 50,000 years a try. Though going by the scowl on his face, it didn't seem like the Prothean was overly impressed by the blasters or all that impressed with Cerberus in general. So perhaps Shepard would hold off on asking him to update his weaponry until they had gone up against some of the Reaper forces and they showed off more of what Imperial tech could do. Ugh, primitives. Bringing slabs of metal onto a battlefield and expecting them to be more than a hindrance. What's next? Someone using a sword and charging at their enemies? "You'd be surprised how effective that can be," Garrus idly commented as the team moved forward. Only against a force lacking even the slightest biotic potential. the only way any competent force could fall against an enemy relying on melee combat is if they were drowned under sheer numbers. Shepard held back a laugh at that. She couldn't wait to see the look on Havoc's face after they ran into Revan at some point. That would definitely be something to look forward to, but right now they had a mission to focus on. Dash, oh dash. Revan braced herself as the shuttle was struck by the anti-aircraft fire from below, something practically unavoidable considering they were flying towards one of the more securely defended sections of the Cerberus facility. Unfortunately, that also meant their landing was going to be a bit more exciting than she had planned for. Alert. Right stabilizer destroyed. Crash landing imminent, the Geth pilot warned as something tore off the outside of the shuttle. Emergency landing procedures. Try and set us down as far away from any defensive emplacements as possible. Revan ordered calmly as she looked over the other occupants of the shuttle. Both her new apprentice Limrace and Talizora seemed relatively unbothered by the news their vehicle was going to crash. The Geth platforms obviously were unbothered by the situation, but even the Marines in the shuttle had an admirable handle on any fear they were experiencing. Good. That meant they might actually survive this. Revan closed her eyes and reached out to the Force, drawing deeply on her connection while waiting for the precise moment she needed to act in order to preserve her stamina. Possibly unneeded, but the Sith hadn't survived countless battlefields by mindlessly throwing power at her problems. A soft whisper at the back of her mind let her know the correct timing, and then, just as the shuttle crashed onto the surface, Revan secured everyone in the craft with a combination of a stasis field and a barrier to cushion them from the impact. A few Marines stumbled as Revan quickly released the hybrid technique and turned her attention to the shuttle doors. A wave of her hand crumpled the durasteel like tinfoil and sent the chunk of mangled metal into a heavy turret that was already turning towards the downed ship. "Move! Off the shuttle now!" Revan barked as she rushed, lightsaber ignited, out into the heart of the Cerberus facility. Rather unfortunately, it seemed they had crashed in a plaza leading up to a large, U-shaped building that must have been either very important or a hub for something, because there were several streets leading to their location and a lot of open space. Useful for moving lots of people at once with minimal disruption, but terrible for defending without barriers and obstacles. Talizora and Limrace moved quickly to catch up with her, closely followed by the Geth troopers and most of the Marines. But an unfortunate few couldn't get out of the shuttle in time before a Cerberus trooper armed with a rocket launcher put a high explosive into the belly of the downed shuttle and killed all that remained inside. The trooper didn't live long to celebrate his kills, however, as several of the surviving Marines instantly focused on him and returned fire. Revan only paid the whole exchange a small amount of attention. No other shuttles had landed in the area they had crashed, and Cerberus had them surrounded. They needed to quickly secure a defensive position and figure out exactly where they had landed. They would need to contact Shepard as well, since it was unlikely they would be able to join her in assaulting the control center as planned. "Talizora, get that door open," Revan ordered, pointing at a nearby building. "Limrace, once she does, take a few Marines and clear out the first floor." "I can cut the door faster than the Quarian can hack it," the ex-Jedi protested. "And then we have to deal with an entry point we can't close. Do as I ordered." Properly cowed, Limrace moved to support Talizora, who had the door hacked within a minute, and then disappeared into the building. In the meantime, Revan and the rest of the Marines dealt with wave after wave of Cerberus troops pouring out of the several streets connected to the plaza. Revan, for the most part, focused on blocking incoming fire, directing her Marines, and occasionally eliminating a trooper trying to target them with heavy weapons. It felt awkward, restricting. The Sith had always preferred to be on the attack even when she needed to defend a location, but with how exposed the rest of her soldiers were, even a small detour to slice apart a squad of troopers would mean casualties on her side, something not acceptable while they were cut off from support and surrounded. Even then, It wasn't like Revan didn't have methods of slowing down enemy reinforcements, such as flipping one of the APCs Cerberus had used to drop off a squad of troopers with the Force, and using the vehicle as an improvised wall to block off one of the smaller streets leading into the plaza. If they were stuck in place long enough, Revan was sure she'd eventually end up building a fortress out of the burned-out remains of the vehicles Cerberus sent after them. Thankfully, it seemed that wouldn't be necessary. "First floor's clear, Revan. You can pull back now," Talizora called over the comms. "Limray's also found something you are going to want to see for yourself." "Understood," Revan replied before switching to the wider command frequency and ordering all her surviving forces to retreat into the building. Cerberus obviously saw them moving and took the opportunity to attempt another charge to overrun their position, this time supported by 2 Atlas mechs. But before the 2 massive machines got close enough that they could open fire, the last of Revan's forces made it past the door, and the Sith Empress decided that now that the crashed shuttle they had arrived in wasn't being used to provide cover for her Marines, it would be perfect as an improvised barrier to the building they had taken over. The grounded ship plus welding the door shut with a few strategic applications of her lightsaber should buy them plenty of time before Cerberus made it through that particular door. Now then. "I'm heading your way now. What exactly are we dealing with?" "We found the entrance to some sort of lab. Definitely signs of Reaper tech, and it looks like Cerberus was growing things in here. There's vats all along the walls." Revan could feel the discomfort in the Quarian's voice and increased her pace. If Cerberus had been playing around with mixing Reaper technology and cloning or anything like that, who knew what monstrosities could come crawling out of that laboratory? Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 71. Shepard sprinted towards a pallet of metal crates and slid behind them just in time to avoid the gunfire from the last few Cerberus troopers in the area. She saw a few red energy bolts zip past as one of her squad mates snapped off a few shots in return and drove the troopers back into cover. No one made any call-outs, so no confirmed kills. Her squad had been moving quickly, but they had stalled right outside the control room. Probably the worst possible place, but there wasn't much they could do about it, not with 2 heavy turrets covering the corridor, forcing them to slow their approach. So now her team had to slowly advance to avoid being targeted by something more suited for tearing through vehicles than infantry while keeping an eye on their backs for Cerberus reinforcements sneaking up behind them. They had already been attacked from the rear 3 times, and none of them had appreciated that one appearance of a lightsaber-wielding phantom that had almost gutted Liara before James shot him in the back and destroyed the power pack. Shepard leaned out of cover and sighted down 2 of the troopers. One was yanked out into the open with a biotic pull, where he was immediately targeted by the rest of her team, and the other caught a 5-shot burst from her blaster rifle before dropping dead. In the meantime, another trooper was shredded by a biotic combo attack between Liara and Javik, and a 4th had his head practically removed by Garrus. "Looks like that's all of them. We really cleaned up," James exclaimed. "Anyone have an idea about how we're slipping past those turrets, though?" "EDI." Shepard tossed the question to their AI tech expert. "Unfortunately, those turrets are not networked to anything, so we will be unable to hack or disable them without direct physical access." "And if they had that, they would be able to slip by anyway." EDI didn't say. Shepard heard it anyway. "Okay, I need options. Any ideas on how to disable or destroy those things? Or go around them if we can't?" "No good on destroying them, Commander. We don't have anything heavy enough to do more than scratch them." James spoke up again. "Going around won't help much either," Liara added. "There's only one other entrance to the control room, and it should be just as heavily defended as this one. We'd have to fight through Cerberus again just to wind up in the same spot." She'd half been expecting something like that, and unfortunately they couldn't even ask Revan's soldiers for assistance either. One of the downsides to her team's blitz on the control room meant that their allies weren't really able to support them. Shepard was starting to worry they would have to fall back to the point where they could acquire enough heavy weapons to destroy the turrets, which would mean risking running through their field of fire at least 2 more times just to get back to where they were now, along with whatever other issues popped up along the way. Looks like you ran into some trouble, Shepard. Maybe I can give you a hand. Shepard reached a hand up to her ear. That you, Kasumi? The one and only, the thief chirped. Your friends made one hell of a distraction on the way in, so I was able to slip inside some interesting places I couldn't get to before. And one of those places can get us through those turrets? Well, I just so happen to be sitting next to the main power node for that section of the facility. Should something happen to it, all the electronics it's providing for should be disabled for a few seconds until the grid adjusts. That should give you a few seconds to reach the control room. Only a few seconds to clear the rest of the corridor, huh? And if those turrets came up early, or they didn't make it in time, they would be caught completely out in the open. But as Shepard compared the distance her team had to cross, it became clear that they could do it. It'd probably be close, but they definitely could. All right, on my signal, blow the node and we'll make for the control room, she ordered and turned to her team. Everyone get ready. We'll move the second Kasumi confirms the turrets are disabled. She got several affirmations back from her team as they all repositioned to the edges of whatever cover they were using and prepared for a sprint. Once everyone was set, Shepard gave Kasumi the order to blow the power node. All right, detonating in 3, 2, 1, boom! Turrets are down, Shep. Get moving. They didn't need her encouragement. The second they got the signal, every member of the ground team was sprinting for the control room doors. Since she was already towards the front, Shepard naturally was the first to stack up on the door, leaving room for EDI to immediately access the door controls once the android reached her. Cerberus security might be better in this facility than their more disposable outposts, but EDI had both the entirety of the Normandy behind her and Cerberus's own playbook on their digital security techniques. She was through the door in seconds. There were 5 operators in the room, 4 of them frantically calling out updates or manipulating their terminals, while a 5th, obviously higher-ranked one barked orders. None of them seemed to realize that the door had opened until Shepard snapped her blaster up and dropped the officer with one shot and one of the operators with another. By that time, the rest of her team had filtered in behind her and opened fire on the remaining 3 before they could even finish reacting to the deaths of 2 of their fellows. Shepard didn't even need to say anything before they split up to secure the room while the commander started poking around one of the terminals. It didn't take too long to find the controls for the prisoner blocks and only moments and a few button presses more to release all the doors. That did it, Commander. All prisoners in this facility have been released, and Imperial soldiers are moving them to evac points. EDI confirmed once Shepard was done. All right, we saved the day. Great job, everybody, but you need to get moving, Shep, if you want that Cerberus database intact. Kasumi said over the comms, its auto-delete timer is running, and I need to physically touch it to get it to stop. The good news is that it's pretty close to you guys, and I can link up with you before you reach the location. Let me guess, the bad news is that there's an army of Cerberus between us and that point. Shepard snarked sarcastically. Oh, I guess you already knew, Kasumi joked back, just like old times. Right, Commander. Dash. Cerberus was going to have to move up on the Empire's threat scale, was what Revan decided as they moved deeper into the lab they discovered. The human supremacist group trying to buy/cheat/steal or otherwise acquire whatever technology they could that would give them an edge over the rest of the galaxy. That was expected. Force. Every other organization in the galaxy did the same on some level, so it would be foolish to believe otherwise. Them throwing ethics and basic decency out the airlock in the name of human advancement? Less tolerable in Revan's opinion for a few reasons, the first being that kind of thinking led to more projects being about satisfying the lead scientist's sadism than actually solving problems. But she herself had turned a blind eye to similar actions taken by subordinate Sith during her war with the Republic. So long as those experiments didn't lead to a general weakening of the galaxy, since the whole point of the war was to prepare for an external invasion. That had been the category Revan had placed Cerberus in for a long time. Her early negotiations with Miranda and the Elusive Man had painted a picture of an organization willing to push boundaries but had the best interests of their species in mind. That position had shifted somewhat when it became clear Cerberus was more about clawing every scrap of power for itself, or rather the group in charge, considering what they did to the rank and file, when they actively went against human interests, even as the Reapers burned their homeworld, not to mention their other efforts. The Empress considered them a problem equal to the Asari Jedi Order at that point, a hostile group that would likely need to be managed or defeated when found until the Reapers had been dealt with because going after them directly was unfeasible. What Cerberus had been playing around with in this lab made them almost as big a threat to the galaxy as the Reapers, because they had delved into and played around with Reaper tech and come up with something similar to the Ragul plague. They called them adjutants, biomechanical horrors like most Reaper-derived creations, but unlike those, Cerberus's creations were an existential threat to the world they inhabited. Because adjutants could create more of themselves without the presence of a Reaper or the Dragon's Teeth devices, the Reapers usually used to create husks. From the lab notes they discovered, they did this by directly infecting a victim somehow and shortly after transforming said victim into another adjutant. If a single one made it to a civilian population, it would replicate out of control until every single other being was either turned or dead. And then they would move on to continue replicating. And Cerberus wanted to use them as an army. Revan placed a hand on her forehead in a vain attempt to banish the sudden headache she was forming. "That bad, huh?" Talizora murmured from a short distance away. "Let me guess. Cerberus lost control of an experiment? It broke out and killed them all?" "Worse," Revan said gravely. "Cerberus sent that experiment somewhere else, and it has the potential to kill planets when they do lose control of it." There was a lot of quiet cursing from the surrounding troopers at the news, but no one questioned if she was serious. Cerberus's reputation among most of the Imperial Navy alone made it believable they would create something like that. "Then what do we do now?" Limrays asked. "Cerberus is trying to evacuate the scientists that remained here when the experiments were moved, and most of the data regarding the creations of the adjutants 3 floors down," Revan replied, already moving towards her target. "We're going to make sure none of them get away to replicate this horror elsewhere and hopefully find a way to neutralize the ones they moved when they inevitably become a problem." The lights in the area suddenly flickered and died before slowly coming back up as auxiliary power went to emergency lights. Revan immediately felt whispers of danger through the Force despite the lack of any visible change in the area. Talizora instantly had her Omnitool up and scanning for the cause of the problem. This sector just lost power for some reason. I'd guess a distribution node was damaged. "Master, do you—" Limrays asked, proving Revan wasn't the only one with a bad feeling all of a sudden. The sound of shattering glass in several parts of the lab cut off Revan's response, and the following animalistic growls told everyone what had just been released among them. "Form squads back to back," Revan ordered. "I want eyes on every direction and call-outs the moment you see movement. Limrays, you and I will engage when we can. Everyone else, get to the stairs and under no circumstances let these things get close to you." With that said, Revan ignited her sabers and stalked into the darkness where the stairs down should be, with the others following nervously behind her. Mass Effect, Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 72. "By the goddess, is there no end to these abominations?" Limrays exclaimed as her saber bisected the final adjutant from the most recent wave of the things. "How many did Cerberus make?" "They didn't," Revan said bluntly. "There must have been more personnel down here than we expected. Support staff, scientists, guards. If the experiments caught them off guard with the power outage, there could have been a spike in the adjutants' numbers before Cerberus even knew they escaped. So criminally incompetent instead of actively malicious. How different from Cerberus's normal operations." Revan paused for a moment because in her experience, Cerberus tended to be both, but then realized Limrays likely only had limited exposure to the organization and either only saw successes or assumed the extent of any revealed failures were overblown rumours. It didn't help that the members of her old order very rarely ventured outside of the Asari Republic and only paid attention to news from the wider galaxy for hints about possible Force users. Her musing was interrupted by some more whispers from the Force, letting her know that more enemies were approaching. "Sergeant, prepare your men," she said lowly to the leader of her handful of remaining Marines. Even between herself and Limrays, the waves of adjutants and attacks from unexpected angles had slowly whittled down her supporting force to just a squad of 4. More of them, already? Look on the bright side, Sergeant. If they are throwing so many of themselves at us, it must be because all the easier prey has already been dealt with. Every kill now is a permanent reduction of their number. It wasn't much of an uplifting speech, but even assuring them the enemy wasn't truly endless was enough to make the Marines stand a little taller and grip their weapons a little tighter. Just in time too, because another adjutant clawed its way over a catwalk and launched itself at their group. Revan quickly moved to intercept even as shouts from the others informed her that more enemies besides this one had revealed themselves, and showcased the worst thing about these creatures, aside from their ability to convert others into more of themselves. The adjutants were intelligent, and they were learning. During the first few encounters, the creatures had just mindlessly rushed forward like rabid animals, their entire plan being overwhelm Revan's group or die trying, and had been somewhat easily dispatched by her group. But then they had started striking from the shadows, from angles their modified physiques allowed them to traverse that no one had expected. The first death among them had come from one adjutant clinging from the underside of a catwalk that went over their path and shot him with the biotic cannon that seemed built into every adjutant's arm. Since that one had been on its own, Revan couldn't tell if it was specifically intelligence that made that creature attack from an ambush or just raw animal cunning after seeing it was outnumbered. Especially as 3 groups after that encounter repeated the rabid animal behavior with little deviation. But this ambush included a distraction, a flanking maneuver, and coordination between at least 3 other adjutants. This group had actually waited long enough that if it wasn't for the Sith's warning, the rest of her group might have relaxed after overcoming their previous encounter. Revan didn't know if it was due to time and experience, the person the creature was created from, or some other factor, but they were definitely getting smarter. They needed to be eliminated before one grew intelligent enough to steal a ship and escape off-planet. Which brought her back to the creature currently clawing at her face. Revan's blue lightsaber stabbed towards the incoming adjutant's right arm to make sure that it couldn't fire into the rest of the group, while she used her red one to shield herself from the creature's other hand. Both sabers sparked off the adjutant's biotic barrier, but it was enough to stop its charge. The Sith ducked around a flailing limb and dragged her saber over its torso until she felt the barrier break and her blade cut through a decent section of where its organs should be. Another quick turn had her lash out and sever its right arm around the shoulder before she drove her second saber into the creature's face, just to be sure it was dead. She couldn't afford to stop, though. Her senses were practically screaming that the fight behind her was going badly, even in the few seconds it took for her to kill the first enemy. Relying on the Force to guide her actions, Revan spun and pulled one of her Marines towards her, moments before an adjutant's arm would have crushed his neck. The Marine went sprawling over the ground, but the Sith figured he'd prefer that over dying. The other Marines had opened fire on a third adjutant that was approaching, but hadn't breached its barrier yet, and Limrays was still dueling her own opponent, so Revan took another moment to force-push another Marine out of the way of the third enemy, before moving to engage the unoccupied second. The space they were in was too enclosed to risk force lightning, so Revan leapt over her still-fallen Marine and fell onto her opponent like a buzzsaw of whirling light. Light, quick touches of her sabers quickly drained its barrier, even as the adjutant gave up aiming its cannon at her and simply fired randomly towards the rest of her group. but Revan had already predicted it doing something like that since others had gone for easier kills before they were slain and levitated the dismembered arm from the first enemy into the energy bolt's path. It exploded into a massive ball of whitish plasma that Revan simply let roll over her own shields and armor. But now that the creature's own defenses had failed, Revan repeated her now-favored tactic of carving out her opponent's torso with one saber and stabbing through the adjutant's face with the other to guarantee a kill. She turned to find Limrace was also done with her opponent, and just in time to see the final adjutant fall after being riddled with blaster fire. Funnily enough, the killing shot seemed to have been made by the Marine she had pushed over. He had just rolled over and continued firing instead of taking the extra couple of seconds it would have taken to get back to his feet. Another group dealt with and no major injuries on their side. That was about as good a result as Revan could hope for. "Area looks clear, Empress," the Marine Sergeant said after a few seconds with nothing else jumping out at them. "We're ready to move out when you are." "Good. Any sign of a way to boost a transmission to the surface?" Revan asked. One of the more urgent objectives Revan had was to alert the fleet that any outgoing ship from this facility needed to be destroyed on the off chance an adjutant managed to stow away on one. One of the others was to inform Shepard and the others of what they had found here so none of them were caught by surprise. Unfortunately, the lab was designed to block all incoming and outgoing signals, and backtracking now could mean getting pinned between the adjutants and the Cerberus forces following after them. "I see an intact terminal over there, Revan," Tali Zora called out, pointing at a bank of monitors that were still intact and hadn't been locked out for whatever reason. "If it has access to the rest of the facility, I should be able to link up with EDI and get a warning out to everyone at the same time." Revan nodded. "Good idea. See if you can open a line to Commander Shepard too. I have a plan to deal with any of the adjutants we might miss, and it will need her help." It took Tali Zora a few minutes, but eventually she managed to pull off enough computer magic that they were able to get a signal out to the Normandy's AI and explain what was happening in the lab. From there, Revan was able to spread the message to her battle group in orbit and order every Imperial out of the facility as quickly as possible. What she hadn't been able to do was get directly connected to Shepard, but simply bouncing a call through EDI was simple enough and accomplished basically the same thing, and Revan wasted no time letting the commander know about the situation. Well, fuck. Leave it to Cerberus to mess around with a techno-plague. What do you need us to do? "I need your help to overload the lab's main reactor. We're going to turn this whole facility into a crater." Dash. A few minutes earlier. It might have been just a bit of an exaggeration to say there was an army of Cerberus goons between them and the database Kasumi was after. But only just a bit. Shepard was actually pretty sure that if Cerberus's battlenet wasn't completely fucked thanks to EDI tearing it apart after they had released all the prisoners, they would have been completely overrun by simple numbers. But the android had messed things up so thoroughly that they had run into individual squads the entire way, and most had no idea Shepard's team was coming through. That didn't mean smooth sailing, though. More than once, her team had almost been flanked because another Cerberus squad had either heard gunfire or was looking to link up with their comrades in the area. Shepard could still feel the soreness in her side where a surprise gunshot had broken her shield and almost penetrated her armor. But small army of Cerberus or not, her team was up to the challenge, and soon they were almost outside the vault they were after. There was just one problem. "You don't have the second key?" Kasumi huffed. "That I already have one key should be impressive enough. Do you have any idea how hard it was to sneak one away without Cerberus locking down the vault and changing the keys?" "Very hard, I'm sure," Garrus replied. "But that doesn't help us get inside now, does it? Where's the second key?" "It's supposed to be with Captain Martin today, according to the schedule I managed to acquire. He was also supposed to be in the central control hub, so I figured it wouldn't be an issue." Kasumi defended herself. "As good as I am, though, I can't plan for what he would do when faced with a full-on invasion." "Fair enough," Shepard admitted. But we still need that key if we want to get that database. Any idea where he is now? EDI stepped forward. Commander, according to the Cerberus BattleNet, Captain Martin was declared KIA in an engagement with Imperial forces close by. Damn. Does this mean we can't get in? James cursed. It's possible that the key would still be on his body, Liara argued. Unless it was hit by a direct shot or was recovered by another member of Cerberus, the Imperials likely wouldn't have recovered anything before moving on. They didn't exactly have a lot of time to sit around discussing things, so Shepard made a snap decision. EDI set a waypoint to where the captain was reported killed. If the key isn't there, we'll have to exfil quick before we get hemmed in. A blue marker appeared on her HUD. All right, let's move. Thankfully, there wasn't much resistance to run into on their way. Only 2 squads that were easily dealt with thanks to the specialists Shepard had on hand. The problems appeared once they got to the plaza entrance where Martin's body supposedly was. Not only was there a mix of Cerberus trooper accompanied by several phantoms poking around the area, there were 2 atlases stomping around. That was going to be difficult to deal with only 2 squads. Okay, people, this is going to get dicey. I want Garrus, Javik, Liara, and Kasumi focusing on the infantry. James, EDI, and I will deal with the mechs, Shepard ordered. Eso es un poco loco, Lola, James muttered. That's a lot of armor to get through just by ourselves. And I left the heavy stuff back on the shuttle. Then it's a good thing Cerberus hasn't cleaned up their toys yet, Shepard said, and pointed to several fallen bodies of the troopers where a few rocket launchers could be seen lying around, even from where they were now. We can use their own heavy weapons against them. I'm down with that. Then let's move. Shepard raised her blaster and after a quick count, opened fire on one of the Cerberus soldiers walking around and then broke into a sprint towards the closest rocket launcher. Several troopers cried out in pain and surprise at the sudden assault, but the Spectre was already focused on her part of the plan. Plus, she trusted her team to do their jobs. Sliding to a stop by the first launcher, Shepard quickly confirmed it was loaded, aimed and fired at the first Atlas. Its shields prevented most of the damage, but enough got through that when James followed up shortly after, the entire cockpit was consumed by the explosion. That was one mech down, but the element of surprise was gone, and the other one wasn't going to be that easy. Shepard threw herself behind a barrier as the second mech spotted them and opened fire. Her cover was thankfully thick enough that even the Atlas's cannon didn't just shred it, but it wouldn't last long either. Shepard quickly pinged EDI to run a distraction, otherwise she was going to be mulched by that gun. Out of the corner of her eye, Shepard could see EDI seemingly abandon any sense of self-preservation to sprint at another rocket launcher. After what happened to his buddy, the Atlas pilot couldn't just ignore that and shifted his fire into the android, only for the bullets to pass harmlessly through the holographic decoy EDI had used. Shepard took advantage of his distraction to swap cover to behind a few stacked cargo crates that would give her some room to move if the Atlas focused on her again. Something that seemed unlikely for now because it seemed James had lucked into another launcher being pretty close by and managed to put a rocket into the Atlas's back, ruining its shields. If they could get through the armor before those came back up, the second mech was toast, and Shepard had eyes on another rocket of her own. She just had Shepard down! She didn't hesitate to listen to Garrus's warning and instinctively let herself drop just in time for an orange plasma blade to ignite and pass through the space she just occupied, and a woman in Cerberus colours appear out of a tactical cloak. One of the phantoms. Fuck! Cerberus's silent ninjas were deadly in close quarters. Combat and the near-unblockable energy blade didn't make fighting them easier. But that didn't mean it was impossible if they got too close. Shepard shoved herself out of the way of a follow-up strike from the knockoff lightsaber, Revan had called it a proto-saber, and kicked at the Phantom's legs. There was a wet popping sound as the ninja's knee dislocated under Shepard's armoured boot, but the woman herself made no sound and just tried to stab the Spectre again. Shepard fended it off with the only thing she had available, the spent rocket launcher in her hands. The protosaber started quickly melting through the weapon, but it wasn't quite the same as Revan's blades. Shepard had enough time before the orange blade cut through her improvised defense to roll out of the way. The Phantom turned to chase, but her dislocated knee gave out and caused her to stumble. Shepard seized on the opening to get closer and grabbed the protosaber by its power cord in hopes of disabling the blade, but just because the weapon was considered pretty shoddy by Revan's standards, that didn't mean Shepard could disable it just because she got her hands on it. The two women ended up in an awkward grappling match as they tried to keep the orange plasma blade away from themselves while trying to shove the other into it. Both of them got in some dirty punches and elbows as well, with neither one getting a clear advantage over the other. Shepard only got the upper hand when she forced the Phantom to shift her weight back onto her bad leg and then slammed her head into the nearby cargo container. With the Phantom stunned, Shepard managed to pull away enough to activate her Omnitool and flashforge an Omniblade and didn't hesitate to ram the thing into her opponent's spine before they recovered from the head trauma. There wasn't time to catch her breath, though. While she had been dealing with the Cerberus ninja, James and EDI had been completely pinned down by the remaining Atlas, and that thing's shields were going to restore themselves pretty soon. Shepard looked down at the ruined remains of her purloined rocket launcher and immediately dismissed it as an option. Nearly cut in half, anything she tried to fire out of the thing was more likely to explode in her face than actually shoot properly, and there was no time to go running around the plaza looking for a new one. She looked at the body in front of her and had an idea, though. EDI, on my mark, I need an overload towards the Atlas. The target will be obvious. There wasn't a reply, but Shepard wasn't expecting one. Instead, she focused on using her biotics to lift the fallen Phantom into the air and then push it towards the Atlas. Ready, Mark! Snapping off a few blaster shots just to make sure she had the Atlas's attention, Shepard watched as the body of the Phantom collided with the mech right around the waist section. She winced a little because that was a bit lower than where she was aiming. But there was nothing she could do about it, as EDI followed her orders and sunk an overcharge into the power pack on the Phantom's back. The things were already prone to violently bursting into flames, but combined with the overcharge and one of her rifle's own power packs attached to it, Shepard figured the Proto-Saber's power source would make a decent bomb. And she was right. The Atlas shook as the power pack detonated, and secondary explosions started appearing all over the frame. Shepard watched as the pilot attempted to bail out of the doomed mech, only for the whole thing to go up like a firework before the hatch could release. A quick look around confirmed that the Atlas had been the last thing standing, and her other teammates had already finished with the infantry and had been moving to help, which she appreciated even if it ended up not being necessary. "Everyone okay?" she asked. "I thought you were joking when you said people would be foolish enough to bring a sword onto the battlefield," Havik said as he walked over. "But with the types of blades used and their stealth technology, I can see why you would consider such tactics dangerous." Shepard noticed that a chunk of the Prothean's shoulder armor had been sliced off and realized she hadn't been the only one a Phantom had managed to sneak up on. "The rest of us are fine, Shepard," Liara added. "Better than fine, Shep. While you were playing with that robot, we managed to find Captain Martin's body and the second key. We're all good to access the database and then get out of here," Kasumi cheered. "Great! Let's start," Shepard started to say, only EDI to interrupt her. "One moment, Commander. Revan's team has uncovered an urgent situation. Connecting the call now." Shepard and the rest of her team listened as the Empress explained what she and Tali had found in one of Cerberus's labs. An engineered creature created from Reaper tech that could infect other species to make more of itself and could overrun the galaxy if it managed to escape this facility. This was Project Overlord all over again. "Well, fuck. Leave it to Cerberus to mess around with a technoplague. What do you need us to do?" "I need your help to overload the lab's main reactor. We're going to turn this whole facility into a crater." "You have it. We're heading that way now." Shepard ended the call and turned to her team. "Okay, We've got another Cerberus doomsday weapon to stop, but we still need that data. Kasumi, you, James, Garrus, and Liara head back to the vault and get that data out. Then, I want all of you on the first shuttle back to the Normandy. EDI and Javik, you're with me. We'll meet up with Revan's team near the reactor room. Any questions? There were none. Then let's move, people. Mass Effect. Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 73. The closer Shepard and her team got to their objective, the more on edge she got. Despite making a beeline towards what should be a critically defended section of the facility, they were running into fewer and fewer Cerberus troopers. Part of her rationalized that as them moving quicker as part of a smaller group. The rest was wondering if it was simply because something else got to the Cerberus squads first. A feeling that was only growing as they started running into additional squads that seemed to be searching the shadows for something that definitely wasn't her own team, or else they'd have been more prepared when the Spectres group engaged. And while it was possible Cerberus might have been paranoid about Kasumi ambushing some of their men while she was running around, Shepard was sure it likely had more to do with the adjutants Revan had warned them about. For fuck's sake, a techno-plague. How had anyone thought that was a good idea? Even by Cerberus standards, it didn't make sense. Project Overlord at least had some kind of logic behind it if you squinted. The Geth didn't communicate like any other group in the galaxy, so if Cerberus wanted to control, or at least negotiate with, if that wasn't possible, them, they needed a way to clearly communicate with them. That logic didn't work with the adjutants, even if Cerberus managed to perfectly control them. Then what? It would not be a self-replenishing army to use against the Reaper's own forces. Shepard might not know exactly how the huskification process worked, but she knew enough to know it wasn't a process that could happen to a body twice. There simply wasn't enough reactive mass after the Reaper's nanomachines tore apart everything to create the initial cybernetics needed for a husk to function to do it again. And that was also assuming the Reapers didn't have some sort of backdoor program that could seize control if they wanted. So at best, Cerberus would need to convert still-living sentients elsewhere and then transport them to any planet contested by the Reapers. Something that would have the entire galaxy turn against humanity after the first instance was discovered out of fear an incoming human ship had adjutants on board to devastate their populations. And Shepard wouldn't even be sure they'd be wrong to do so. She pushed those thoughts of the future out of her head and refocused on the present as the final Cerberus trooper in the squad they encountered fell to the ground with several smoking holes burned into his armor. "Clear. Everyone good?" she asked as she checked herself over. Shields were holding strong, no breaches in her armor, and the shot counter on her blaster still read over 100 shots left. "Everything is green here, Commander," EDI reported. "Indeed, I have no issues besides the sudden decrease in quality among our adversaries," Javik said. "This last performance was just insulting. Don't get used to it. While the troopers might not be that dangerous, we're still probably going to have to deal with any adjutants we run into on the way to the reactor room," Shepard cautioned. "Speaking of EDI, nav point updated, Commander." Good. They were actually pretty close now. The three of them swiftly moved through the halls of the Cerberus facility, now that most of the defenders were gone, until they reached the heavily armored doors leading into the reactor. Shepard and Havik kept an eye out for any enemies while EDI worked on getting the door open, but concerningly, none made an appearance, not even an alarm. Considering there should have been some technicians watching the reactor at all times, especially when the facility was under attack, just in case someone attempted to do precisely what Shepard's team was here for, that told the commander that they were either about to be ambushed or something had already gotten inside. So when EDI managed to get the door open and there wasn't a Cerberus squad there to prevent them from getting inside, Shepard didn't lower her guard. If anything, she raised it higher. To make things worse, they had entered the reactor room close to the top of the chamber. They were going to have to find a way to the bottom where the main controls were if they wanted to overload the main reactor. And concerningly, there was no sign of Revan's group either. "Revan, we made it to the main reactor, but it's going to take a bit to get down to the controls. Where are you?" Shepard said lowly over the comms as her team moved into the room. "We're Scart way, but we Scart massive Cerberus presence. It Scart dangerous the adjutants breaking loose. Scart to deal with them." Shepard frowned at the amount of static breaking up the call, but she got the gist of the message. Cerberus was making a big push for the labs to do something about the adjutants. Destruction or capture was up to how reckless the officer in charge was, and had gotten between Revan's group and their destination. They would just have to. Shepard's instincts screamed as something landed on the catwalk her team was using, almost too soft for her to notice. But when she turned to look, there was nothing beside a slight heat haze beside. "Javik, move!" The Prothean followed her order almost immediately, just in time to almost dodge the burning orange blade that suddenly appeared with the very recognizable snap hiss of a lightsaber. The energy blade easily cut through his shields and armor, causing a deep gash into his side that made Havik cry out in pain, but he didn't end up bisected for now. That blade was still in position to attack him, if no one did anything. Unfortunately, the way Havik dodged had put himself between EDI and their invisible attacker, and Shepard didn't have a clear shot, so she did the first thing that came to mind to protect her squad. She biotic charged straight for the base of the blade and grappled the wielder before throwing both of them over the side of the catwalk. Not her best idea. A distant part of her brain acknowledged, even as the rest of her focused on not slamming into the machinery below. But her enemy hadn't expected it either, and ended up landing harder. As Shepard scrambled back to her feet, she looked over to see that the Cerberus agent's tactical cloak had broken to reveal a heavily augmented man with Asiatic features. One she recognized from one of Revan's reported encounters, Kai Leng. "Commander Shepard." The Cerberus assassin returned as he got to his feet. "I've been looking forward to this moment. The elusive man kept delaying our meeting so much I was starting to get worried it was because you would be a disappointment, but you're just as skilled as I heard about. I thought I'd at least get one of your teammates before you noticed me." "Always nice to meet a fan," Shepard quipped before she snapped her blaster rifle up and fired a few shots at the man. Leng might have had a lightsaber, but Shepard was betting even with whatever Reaper Tech enhancements Cerberus had given him, it wouldn't be enough to let him actually block or reflect the blaster bolts like Revan could. She was almost immediately proven correct, as the Cerberus assassin made no move to attempt to use the plasma blade to defend, but triggered a powerful personal shield that simply absorbed the shots with no apparent effort. Shepard continued to fire more blaster bolts at Leng, and even a couple biotic shockwaves for good measure, but the shield barely flickered. It reminded her very strongly of the shield the previous Shadow Broker had used in their fight against him, which meant they were practically invulnerable to anything that wasn't hand-to-hand. Something slightly suicidal when going up against someone with a lightsaber without a weapon or shield of their own that could block the damn thing. "I suppose I am something of a fan of yours," Leng said casually, as if he hadn't been repeatedly shot at. "Hero of Elysium, N7, humanity's first Spectre. You were the poster girl for the best we had to offer, and you proved it when you beat Saren and his Reaper." Shepard got the feeling Leng liked to hear himself talk. Unfortunately, with that shield up, there wasn't much she could do to make him stop. So she just let him while she searched the area for anything that would give her an edge over the Cerberus operative. "And then you let all of that go to waste when you decided to play nice with the Council when you should have been advocating for human interests," Leng sneered. "In my defense, it's really hard to care about tax codes and corporate privileges when the galaxy is about to be wiped back down to the Stone Age," Shepard pointed out. "We needed the other races to help us prepare. Still do, since in case you haven't noticed, Earth is under siege, and we need help to take it back. What we need is for the rest of the galaxy to fall in line, and after I kill you, Cerberus is going to be the one giving the orders." Shepard circled him cautiously. "I think you might be overestimating my importance a little now." I'm hardly the person giving people orders. But you are the one people go to for answers, Leng countered. The Krogan, the Turians, the Alliance, all of them go to you when they need something done. And with you out of the way, Cerberus will be the one to give them the solutions they need instead, for a price. Exploit them for short-term gains while screwing everyone over long-term, Shepard translated. Then it's a good thing we're going to stop you. Kai Leng chuckled. Oh, Shepard, you might have been the best humanity could offer a few years ago, but I'm going to show you how much that's changed. With that, the time for talk was over as Leng charged forward. Shepard snapped up her blaster rifle and snapped off several shots at his head. Leng's shield might protect him from the energy bolts, but repeated bursts of plasma in his face should still cause issues for his vision. It almost wasn't enough. Shepard waited until the last moment before throwing herself forward to dodge under the orange lightsaber blade and saw an explosion of sparks as the blade carved a line into the front of her armor. But there was no pain and no smell of burned flesh. A close miss. Shepard didn't hesitate to put some distance between the two of them. She couldn't win in close combat, and that shield made standing around shooting at him a waste of time. She needed to find a way around Leng's defenses quickly, or this was going to be a very one-sided fight. As she ran through the maze of machinery, Shepard started going through a checklist of potential ways to get an attack in. Sudden shots from her rifle were automatically blocked by Leng's shield. Direct biotic attacks were similarly useless. Sparks from her rifle hitting the machinery walls had made Leng flinch, so at least Shepard knew his shield worked like other kinetic shields. Things slow enough or with too much mass would be able to get through it. That one scrap of information gave her the beginnings of a plan, but she would only have one or two chances to make use of it. Leng still had his own body armor and training. He wouldn't just let Shepard get through his defenses the same way time after time if she failed to take him out. Running only delays things, Shepard, Leng cried out, as the Spectre charged away from him again, even as his blade sliced through a thick metal support for the walkways above them. She didn't fall for the taunt, though. Running had kept her alive so far, and she had finally found something she could hopefully slip past that shield. No need to screw things up now. Shepard feigned to be out of breath from her most recent charge, and to be fair, her amp was uncomfortably warm from the constant use it had seen today, while she body-blocked a certain warning label and turned to futilely shoot more blaster bolts at Kai Leng. She had already done the same thing 3 times before without trying to pull something, so she wasn't surprised when Leng fell for the bait and rushed her before her amp could reset and allow her to escape again. The assassin rushed towards her, and just when she was sure he had committed, Shepard charged away once again. But this time, instead of attempting to put distance between them, Shepard spun back around and unloaded her rifle into the machine she had just been resting against. The thin metal casing was no match for the red energy bolts, though Shepard had a moment of vindictive glee as one of them pierced through the high-voltage warning label she had hidden before something sparked inside the machine and promptly exploded. Kai Leng was sent flying as a result, but his shield, armor, and cybernetics were enough that he didn't die. Good effort, Shepard. Leng growled as he dragged himself back to his feet, using the wall and reignited his lightsaber. You almost got me with that one. Yeah? Well, now that you don't have that fancy shield, let's see how you hold up, Shepard challenged, raising her rifle again. Tempting, but I've already won. You weren't the only one setting up a trap. Shepard tensed for whatever Leng was about to do, only to freeze when the Cerberus operative cut through another metal support for the walkways above them. There was an ominous groan above them, and Shepard realized Kai Leng's plan was dropping several tons of metal on her head. Bastard! Huh, goodbye, Shepard. Kai Leng cut through one more support, and the walkways finally couldn't support their own weight. With one last groan of tortured metal, they began collapsing, and Shepard found herself staring at almost certain death as the heavy steel platform fell towards her, only for the platform to freeze mid-air. Shepard, move! EDI called as she, Javik, and a handful of Imperial troopers rushed out of the surrounding machinery and opened fire on Kai Leng. Tsk, looks like you get to live for now after all, Shepard. Leng growled and started to run away. You won't be so lucky next time. Shepard didn't bother replying except to add her own blaster shots into the mix, but Leng's shield had either recovered or he had a backup, and she could only watch as the assassin slipped around a corner and vanished. She scowled, but truthfully, there were more important things to do than go chasing after one operative. Are you all right, Shepard? I'm okay. A bit banged up, but no actual injuries. What about you, Havoc? She asked her squad mate as the new arrivals moved to set up a perimeter and the walkways magically floated off to a side where they were harmlessly lowered. A minor scratch. I am fine. The Prothean deflected. Great, and I see you guys found Revan's team. Thanks for the assist, by the way, Shepard said as she saw the Sith Empress walking over to them, followed by Tali and an unknown Asari. I'm glad we arrived in time, Revan replied. But we don't have time to stand around. The adjutant numbers seem to be growing again and Cerberus is just throwing more bodies at them. Shepard nodded. Right, we can catch up later. EDI, can you get started on the main reactor controls? The rest of us will get to work disabling the failsafe features. Talizora, you have the lead there. Let us know if you need assistance. Revan ordered her own team. Let's end this crisis before it gets any worse. Yes, Mom! Several voices rang out, followed by a rush of movement. Dash, oh dash. Between EDI and Tali's expertise, it didn't take long to sabotage the facility's reactor, to go critical on their command. After setting a 20-minute countdown just to ensure the place would be destroyed even if something happened to them, both Shepard and Revan's teams rushed back towards the surface and the closest shuttle they could call in. Looking down over the Cerberus prison facility, Shepard could still see some active anti-air batteries firing at the Imperial fighters buzzing through their airspace, but most of them had either been destroyed or simply had nothing to target as the rest of Revan's forces had already pulled back after extracting the freed prisoners. It was time to end this mission with a bang. All forces pull back to minimum safe distance, Shepard ordered over her comms. Main reactor detonation. In 3, 2, 1. There was a brief flash as the Cerberus facility was consumed by a short-lived star. Not only had they rescued nearly everyone Cerberus had imprisoned here and found a treasure trove of data that would hopefully lead them to more facilities like this one, and had also stopped another Cerberus-created doomsday scenario. Even if there had been some rough spots along the way, Shepard would consider the entire thing a job well done. Mass Effect. Night of the Old Republic, Chapter 74. All of the rescued prisoners have been settled, Empress. We can leave for the Citadel on your command. Revan nodded at the update. Make the announcement that we will be leaving in 10 minutes and plot a course using the Mass Effect relays as the final approach and send a message ahead. No need to frighten the politicians too much by showing up unannounced. Yes, Mom. ETA for the Serpent Nebula is 6 hours. If things had been different, Revan would have preferred to avoid going anywhere close to the Citadel and simply focus on her own territory. But acquiring a couple of thousand prisoners from the Cerberus prison facility had altered her plans. Revan could simply unload all of them on a planet that she controlled, or even one in Citadel space, and allow them to deal with the prisoners. The amount would be a slight shock to the local systems to deal with, but not much more than what was already occurring thanks to refugees fleeing the Reapers, and at planetary levels a few extra thousand was a rounding error. But this was an opportunity to turn the heart of Citadel space against Cerberus that simply would not be possible otherwise. Because while Cerberus was officially labelled a terrorist organisation, for most of the Citadel residents they simply were another violent group. Not a group that had almost twice now released something that could have ended galactic civilization. Surely they couldn't be much worse than any of the other pro-species terrorist groups out there? Revan hoped that by showing the bureaucrats in the Citadel the sheer scale that Cerberus could operate in, by showing them the thousands of prisoners in one facility and the rest of the populace that even humans weren't safe from Cerberus, the organization would have many of their silent partners and supported turn away from them. And by releasing the rescued prisoners in the heart of Citadel space, stories about what Cerberus had done to them would spread light years faster than if Revan used a different location. It would be the first move in her plan to corner and eventually destroy Cerberus entirely. But that would be for the future. For now, she caught a shuttle and made her way over to the Normandy. Not only had Shepard invited her and Talizora over to let them reunite with some previous teammates they had picked up, Revan also wanted to have another conversation with the Turian Primarch while he was available. His support would do a lot to help broker deals for the Empire. "Revan! Rex!" The Empress nodded at the Krogan warlord's boisterous greeting. "It hasn't been that long, but I assume you've been well?" "Slowly going insane, more like." Rex unexpectedly scowled. Between that damn Solarian and his needles and Shepard getting up to her normal brand of crazy, it seems like everyone else is out there having all the fun while I just keep getting stabbed in my... Well, you don't need to know that part. But things are going well. With the genophage cure, I mean? I wouldn't know. The doc sounds excited about the progress, but I can't understand half the things he says. Revan nodded at that. It was a familiar frustration for many people interacting with experts that sometimes forgot that their audience did not have several academic encyclopedias memorized, or that their vocabulary choices would actually make things less clear if they used incredibly specific terminology. She herself had occasionally been a perpetrator of doing so when it came to engineering projects, and had actually gotten worse about the habit thanks to the Geth's ability to simply download or look up most of the information they lacked in real time. I see. And the reason you are here to greet me? I'd have assumed you would be catching up with the others. I know Admiral Talizora was excited to see you again, Revan said. Yeah, little Pyjak has moved up in the world, Rex mused before shaking his head. But she's currently catching up with Shepard, and there's only so much talk about ship movements and logistics I can take before I want to fall asleep. Besides, I didn't want to miss you meeting Havoc properly for the first time, not with him getting on your little Asari friend's last nerve. Limb race? Yes, the Asari Jedi was a bit more emotionally unstable, thanks to Revan forcing her to break from her old mindset, but she shouldn't be that easy to upset. Either Revan had misjudged her situation, or this Havoc was particularly irritating. Either way, she should probably step in before something unfortunate happened. Thank you for the warning, though I have to admit, I wouldn't have expected you to play peacemaker while Shepard was busy. Rex laughed. Peacemaker? I just don't want to miss what happens when he opens his mouth. Particularly irritating, it was then. Revan decided to deal with that first and tracked down Limrays in the Normandy's exercise hall. Apparently her apprentice had been focusing on her lightsaber forms when this Javik had interrupted her. And given the conversation topic, she could understand why Limrays was starting to lose her patience with the crustacean-looking alien. What you have said does not change the fact that this weapon of yours is simply an over-engineered primitive weapon. Any modern firearm would be more efficient than limiting yourself to a melee weapon regardless of the biotic techniques you rely on. It's not about efficiency. A Jedi, a Force user's lightsaber is an extension of themselves. It's not just a tool that someone carries around. There are plenty of traditions that explain this. Traditions you either fail to adequately elaborate on or don't know the history of, Javik grumbled. And truthfully, I do not care what superstitious nonsense you Asari have invented to justify using a sword as a primary weapon. I just want to know why this technology has not been developed in a manner that can be used against the Reapers. Partly because the creation of a proper lightsaber requires some level of Force alchemy to work correctly, meaning any creation of one is an artisan level of production. And partly because that process forges a Force bond between the creator and the weapon in a way that makes ranged weaponry actively harmful to the user if one was made as a ranged weapon like you were likely expecting, Revan said, inserting herself into the conversation. Alchemy and bonds. The Prothean deadpanned as he gave Revan a look of pure scorn. More mysticism nonsense. More likely it was an experimental process designed by my people before the complete fall of our civilization your primitive minds could not fully grasp. That would be impressive considering the technology behind lightsabers and their predecessors, Force-Isabers, are over 34,000 years old and originated in an entirely different galaxy than this one, Revan riposted. And do not so easily dismiss mysticism when it comes to a Force user. With the right tools and knowledge, even a rather weak adept could warp reality around them. That sounds like poorly understood biotics, Shavik said stubbornly. Can biotics create fire, lightning, illusions that seem as real to any sense you care to name, Revan said as she created examples of each technique. Or perhaps you would like a talisman that can render its wearer invisible, rituals that could imbue objects with protective qualities beyond their natural characteristics. Or, Revan held up the hilt to one of her lightsabers, help create a blade that can almost instantly cut any material while bonding to it in a way that allows you to find it anywhere or use it as a focus to perform other techniques no matter the distance. That has nothing to do with the efficiency of using a gun over a sword, Shavik said, sidestepping the issue. He was just going to keep picking at different parts until she agreed with him or could not form a convincing argument, wasn't he? Very well. In that case, would you like a personal demonstration? Any firearm you care to use against my lightsaber. If you can even touch my shields, I'll concede to your point. Revan offered, and she could see Javik consider the offer. This is what I was waiting for. Rex laughed off to one side. Dash, oh dash. Wow. Sounds like you've been busy, Shepard said as Tali finished telling them about the resettling efforts still ongoing on Rannoch, even with the Geth helping get the remnants of the migrant fleet settled. What's even going to happen to all those ships now that the Quarians don't need them? Garrus asked. Are you going to refit them, or try selling them off? Most of the older ones are getting broken down and used to build more Imperial-style ships along with what Geth model ships we can spare, Tali admitted. All the refit packages are being focused on the Krogan ships instead. Krogan ships? Shepard blurted out. Yes, the Krogan have a semi-formal alliance with Revan's Empire, Liara revealed. In return for air on Tuchanka, they have been fixing up and rearming the decommissioned Krogan fleet for their own use. Well, damn. When did that happen? Garrus asked. Not long before the first summit meeting before we went off to retrieve Eve. Shepard frowned and looked at the Asari shadow broker. I thought the Empire still had a months-long wait list for things like that. Or was Revan just exaggerating for the politicians? Liara shrugged half-heartedly. She was talking about the planetary shields specifically, and she wasn't exaggerating. There really is a rather long wait list for those things, even if 2 new factories were recently opened to meet the demand. The parts for ship-sized weapons and shields are actually starting to be sold on the black market in Citadel space. I don't know if Revan will like that, Tali muttered. Should you even be telling me that? Even if you are an information broker? It will be fine. Who do you think contacted me to help sell them in the first place? You know, between all the missions and craziness that normally follows Shepard, I sort of forgot Liara is the head of the largest underground criminal market in the galaxy and not just able to find out whatever information she needs. Funny, I was thinking the same thing, Shepard added. Hey, Liara, any reason you haven't gotten us some of those upgrades? Mostly because while those upgrades are incredible compared to most of what non-Reaper tech has to offer, it is also very loud compared to our current systems. Since most of the Normandy's operation relies on its abilities as a stealth frigate, I didn't see the point in offering anything that compromised that ability. Fair, Shepard grumbled, but I still would have liked to know it was an option. The Alliance in particular would pay for any upgrades we could send their way. Liara tilted her head. They already are, along with the Turians and the Volus. It mostly hasn't been advertised because Revan is expecting issues between the Asari and Salarian council members and is trying to avoid that as long as possible. Huh, that's good to know. Shepard wasn't surprised that there were things going on in the background she wasn't aware of. There was simply too much going on with the war against the Reapers for her to catch up on every little thing. It was just a pleasant surprise for once that positive things were happening in the background without her direct involvement for once. Maybe things were starting to look up. Commander, a live weapon alert has been detected in the fitness room. Javik seems to be attacking Revan. EDI suddenly announced from a nearby speaker. Or not, Shepard was already moving towards the elevator even as she tried to get more context for the alert. Can you tell me why a member of my crew just opened fire on the head of state for the newest galactic empire, EDI? She barely paid attention to Garrus, Liara and Tali shadowing her steps because of how much she was rushing. To summarize, Javik was debating with Revan's apprentice about the tactical inefficiencies about using a sword in a modern battlefield until Revan herself arrived. After a brief conversation, she then proceeded to challenge him to land a single hit on her to prove that his opinion was invalid. Okay, so probably not an assassination attempt or another Samara situation, but definitely not ideal. She sprinted out of the elevator and towards the exercise hall, turning the corner just in time to see Javik fly through the air and collapse in a miserable pile at her feet. A quick look around showed Revan standing in the middle of the room, lightsaber ignited, and several other people watching from behind some improvised cover. And Rex laughing his ass off in a corner. Couldn't forget that part. What? Shepard started, using every ounce of her angry officer voice. The hell is going on in here? Most of the crew immediately snapped to attention and lost whatever humour was on their faces. Unfortunately, Rex was not one of them and continued giggling to himself, even in the otherwise silent room. A small demonstration in personal capabilities, Revan eventually offered, deactivating her lightsaber and smoothly hiding it behind her back. I'd be happy to do another if Havik is up for another round. The Prothean groaned and made no effort to move from his heap on the floor. Shepard looked from him back to Revan, who was attempting to stand there nonchalantly. Shepard was going to strangle her.